Chapter 42:10. I don't want to drink milk anymore. I'm tired of drinking milk every day. She said so. Alice instructed Hua Jin to prepare yogurt without batting an eyelid. She asked, "Is yogurt okay?" "Yeah, that's fine too." Natalia nodded. From her expression, it seemed that she was no different from her usual self. However, Alice felt a chill run down her spine. The Natalia in front of her didn't seem to be any different from her usual self. However, Natalia's cold gaze when she got out of bed still left a deep impression on her. Could it be that all this was her disguise? Alice couldn't help but suspect. Was Natalia a good actress? Hypothetically speaking, this was the case. Natalia was familiar with Natalia's personality in everyone's eyes. Hence, she would deliberately imitate Natalia's every word and action. She even knew what Natalia liked. Yogurt, ham, comic books, swings. However, when Hua Jin placed the yogurt in front of her, Natalia was obviously a little hesitant. However, after a short while, she picked up the cup and took a sip. She knew Natalia's likes and dislikes. Hence, she played the role of Natalia without batting an eyelid. Alice acted as if nothing had happened. She didn't want to make her suspicious. A day passed and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Natalia was obviously not close to her. After breakfast, she returned to her room. Through the surveillance camera on her phone, Natalia was sitting at her desk, obediently flipping through her comic book. She seemed to be enjoying it. She didn't seem to have changed much from before. Could it be that scene in the morning was her imagination? Alice wondered. Soon, the day passed. Natalia went to bed early as usual. However, she keenly noticed that she did not hug the crystal ball before going to bed that day. Instead, she marked a circle on the calendar and went to bed early. Alice sneaked into her room while she was asleep. At that moment, the room was unusually quiet. Only the sound of Natalia's breathing could be heard. It was obvious that she had fallen asleep. After making sure that she was asleep, Alice flipped through the calendar. She was shocked to find that there were circles on the calendar. Not every day had one. On average, there were only 2 circles a week. At most there were 3 circles. This phenomenon had existed tacitly for 2 months. Could she understand that this was a mark left by Natalia on the calendar? If Natalia was the one who woke up, she would leave a circle on the calendar as a mark. If that was the case, Natalia would appear about 9 times a month. These 9 times, however, Hua Jin did not notice it at all. Did this mean that Natasha's research was so godlike that even the people around her did not notice this detail? Alice couldn't help but feel terrified. So why did Natalia copy Natalia's every word and action? What was her purpose in doing this? Was to disguise herself? Could it be that this was a way to protect himself? Then, if the hypnosis was real, what was Natalia's purpose for hypnotizing Hua Jin and Gong Fan? More importantly, a child, even if it was a created second personality, what methods did she have to know hypnosis? Chapter 42:11. Before this, Alice had the habit of communicating with Hua Jin every day. Usually, it was over the phone to find out about Natalia's situation and changes. However, Hua Jin said that there was nothing out of the ordinary. That meant that there was a big problem. There were too many things that needed to be uncovered. Alice suddenly realized that Natalia might be hiding many secrets that no one knew about. The next day, when Natalia woke up, Alice discovered through the surveillance that it was the other personality, Natalia, who had woken up, and not Natalia. As soon as she walked downstairs, she skipped over to Hua Jin and asked with a smile, "Can I go and play with you today?" You? Hua Jin was stunned. Now that Alice was not by his side, he did not know how to reply. He had no way of monitoring Natalia. Usually, the phone that was connected to the surveillance camera was kept by Alice. Hence, he had no way of knowing which personality the girl in front of him was. "Can't I?" Natalia said with some regret. "Can't I go and play with him? I'm so bored here alone." Hua Jin smiled and said, "I can play with you. But you're not fun." Natalia sat at the dining table and held her head dejectedly. She pouted and said, "Also with this auntie around, I feel very uncomfortable." Hua Jin knew that she was not close to Alice. It was not strange that she did not like Alice. Hence he coaxed her, "I'll take you to play with Brother Yu tomorrow, okay?" "Don't." Natalia started to whine. "I just want to play with him today, okay? Is something wrong with him? That's not it. After hesitating for a long time, Hua Jin finally nodded gently. Okay. Then, I'll take you there after breakfast. Okay. Natalia clapped her little hands happily, looking very happy. Then you must eat your breakfast obediently before I take you there. All right. Natalia had just finished her breakfast when Alice came downstairs. For some reason, the smile on Natalia's face faded when she saw her. Coincidentally, she had also finished her breakfast. She immediately said to Hua Jin, I'm full. I'm going upstairs to change. With that, she headed upstairs. Alice looked back at her and asked curiously, change clothes? Where is she going? Hua Jin said, she wants to play with you. Upon hearing this, Alice's face sank slightly. She quickly walked to his side and lowered her voice as she asked, You agree? Yes. Hua Jin sensed that something was wrong with her expression and immediately became nervous. What's wrong? Can't I? It's not that I can't. It's just that her condition is not stable now. I don't want her to interact with you. Why? Hua Jin found it strange. I don't think there's anything wrong with her. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Alice looked at him reproachfully. Are you going to take her out now? Hua Jin nodded hesitantly. Yes. Alice sighed deeply and frowned. How could she let Natalia and Yu be alone together? Naturally, she was afraid that something would go wrong. Hua Jin studied her expression and asked tentatively, Then should we reject her? Chapter 42:12. Forget it. Alice waved her hand. You've already promised her. If you don't go now, she'll definitely be suspicious. Forget it. I'll go with you and be more careful. Who knows? Maybe I'll be able to observe something. Hua Jin listened and nodded. However, when the three of them were about to leave, Natalia saw that Alice was going with them and pouted unhappily. Why does she want to go with us? She muttered to Hua Jin. Obviously, she felt uncomfortable with Alice going with them. Hua Jin squatted down and asked her curiously, Do you not like Aunt Alice? Natalia turned around to glance at Alice and nodded sadly. I don't know why, but I feel like she's spying on me. Even Hua Jin couldn't help but be stunned by her sensitive answer for a long time. Hua Jin lifted his head to look at Alice, but Natalia suddenly said unwillingly, If she's going, then I won't go. I'm not a criminal. Why should she spy on me? As she said this, she turned her head to the side and said unhappily, I know I'm sick, seriously sick, but that's not a reason for her to spy on me. She was young, but her logic was not inferior to that of an adult. Hua Jin pursed his lips and looked at Alice helplessly. Alice looked at Hua Jin, then at Natalia, and raised her eyebrows. She could tell that the latter was unhappy that she had tagged along. She also felt that it wasn't appropriate for her to go. If Natalia was alerted, it would be detrimental to her research. Alice took a step back and said, Why don't you guys go? I have nothing to do if I go. Okay. Alice said as she turned around and went back into the house. She stood by the window until she saw Hua Jin and Natalia get into the car. 15 minutes later, she walked to the garage and started a car. She took a shortcut and sped toward Xianxia's house. Natalia was on guard. Alice's sixth sense told her that the child was Natalia, not Natalia. Therefore, she absolutely could not sit back and do nothing. Because they took a shortcut, Alice arrived at Xianxia's house before Hua Jin did. Xianxia knew that Hua Jin and Natalia were coming, so she started preparing an exquisite lunch early in the morning. When she saw that Alice was also here, she was surprised. What happened? She looked at Alice and saw that she had come alone. She was a little confused. Where are Hua Jin and Natalia? That little girl is on guard against me. She didn't want me to come with her, so I came secretly. She said that she wanted to play with you. I was also worried that she would interact with you alone. I want to talk to you alone. Xianxia immediately nodded when she heard this. Okay. Alice went up to the study on the second floor. Yu was reading in the study. Alice knocked on the door and walked in. Yu was a little surprised to see her. Alice. Shoo. Alice walked up to him, looking a little serious. Yu was stunned. What's wrong? You don't look well. Did something happen to Natalia? Chapter 42:13. Alice squatted down in front of him and said gently, I found something fishy these few days. Do you still remember when Gong Fan was hypnotized by Natalia? You didn't think much of it. That was a coincidence. There's no evidence. It must be Natalia who hypnotized Gong Fan. But don't you think it's too much of a coincidence? The two of them came into contact once and something happened to Gong Fan. I suspect that Natalia's other personality, which is Natalia, might know hypnotism. How could she know hypnotism? It was unbelievable that such a young child would know such powerful hypnotism. Yu found it hard to believe. Even a hypnotist like Alice only finished her apprenticeship a few years ago. Other than Gong Fan, you haven't had any direct contact with Natalia. There are too many unknown possibilities. You can't say for sure, and I don't dare to make a conclusion either. Yu nodded slightly. I understand. You want me to be careful. Alice explained some of the usual hypnotism techniques seriously. Do you know about awake hypnotism? Yu shook his head. He didn't understand the field of hypnotism. Do you remember that I hypnotized you before? Yes, I remember that. Yes, that's trance hypnotism. Trance hypnotism? Yu didn't understand. What's the difference between the two? There's a big difference. When a person was awake, asleep, dreaming, and feeling happy, the brain would operate at different frequencies and release different chemicals. The different frequencies of the brain could cause different physical sensations, such as fatigue and relaxation. Hypnotism interfered with these frequencies. In other words, it interfered with the brain waves. Trance hypnotism was when a person was tired, asleep, or in a trance. The hypnotist interfered with the brain waves to achieve the goal of hypnotism. However, awake hypnotism was the highest level in the field of hypnotism. Awake hypnotism wasn't something that any hypnotist could do. Awake hypnotism required a hypnotist's talent. In other words, it had nothing to do with age. There were many classic examples of lucid hypnosis in the real world. For example, when people saw red, they would immediately think of the national flag and blood donation. When they saw yellow, they would think of sunflowers. Then, when red and yellow were together, they would think of McDonald's. This was the sober hypnosis used in commercials. As for the general public, there was no lack of a minority who accepted such clear-headed hypnosis suggestions. Alice suspected that Natalia had used sober hypnosis on Gong Fan. However, she wasn't present at the time, so she didn't know what had happened. But after Gong Fan saw Alice once, he never returned to this body, did he? Yu nodded. After hearing what he said, he also felt that this was a little too suspicious. Then, what is her goal? Yu's question stumped Alice. Even she could not be sure why Natalia would do that, and why she would use lucid hypnosis. She had thought of many possibilities, but none of them could be valid. However, her sixth sense told her that there must be something that she had missed. However, I don't understand. What's the benefit of Natalia hypnotizing Gong Fan? Chapter 42:14. I don't know. But I think there is something suspicious. Yu blurted this out of the blue. When Alice heard this, she was surprised. Go ahead. Professor Romanka worked so hard to cultivate Natalia, and used her as an experimental specimen. Why did he let us take Natalia away so easily? Don't you think it's suspicious? Alice was stunned. Yu looked at her and said, I think the real suspect is Professor Romanka. Do you think it's possible for someone else to control her personality? Well, I can't tell you now. Maybe it sounds like a fantasy story, but I do think it's suspicious. Maybe I'm just imagining things. Alice was at her wit's end. But now was not the time to talk about this. Alice looked dispirited. I don't know what went wrong. Anyway, you have to be careful when you interact with Natalia. For example, if you feel tired, don't look into her eyes, her expressions, and her movements. Is it so scary? Yu was puzzled. Even if I'm not asleep, I can still be hypnotized by her? If you feel tired, that's when your brainwaves are at their weakest. It's also the time when you are most susceptible to interference. Yu nodded seriously. Okay, I understand. Downstairs, the sound of a car engine could be heard. Alice sensed that someone had arrived. She said to Yu, I'm going to the room upstairs. If anything happens, let me know, okay? I'll be upstairs. I'll try my best not to make any mistakes. If Natalia finds out that you're upstairs, she'll be suspicious. Then, all our efforts will be in vain. Alice was stunned. She did not expect Yu to be so wise. Okay, I got it. Alice went upstairs. Yu went downstairs. At this time, Hua Jin was holding Natalia's hand as they walked in. When Natalia saw Yu, she showed an unprecedented enthusiasm. Yu. She skipped over and held his hand, revealing a cute smile. I'm so bored at home alone, so I wanted to come and play with you. What do you want to play? I saw the game you played with Xianxia on TV. I want to play it too. Oh, is it a PS4? Yeah, it's a boxing game. Xianxia bought a PS4 and an Xbox 360 at home. When he had nothing to do, he liked to pester Yu to play games. However, now that he was addicted to PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, he was not that enthusiastic about these games. Usually, only Yu and Wuxia would play them occasionally. There was a layer of dust on the console. This was a console game, so it had to be connected to the TV to play. The graphics were very clear, and it was similar to many games in the arcade. There were fighting games which were good for intelligence. The last time Natalia saw Yu and Xianxia playing Tekken 7, she was very interested in it. Hence, she said that she wanted to play with Yu. However, she had to go home later, so she did not play. Chapter 42:15. The two little guys surrounded the TV and played with relish. Xianxia brought the desserts over, but she realized that Yu was obviously not in the mood. He was looking at the television, but it was as if he wasn't looking at the screen. He was holding a controller in his hand and randomly pressing buttons. Even so, he was randomly pressing buttons in the air. Natalia's face was red from playing with all her might, but she was still no match for Yu. Oh, why do I keep losing to you? Natalia was huffing and puffing her cheeks. It was obvious that she was playing with fire. Yu finally came back to his senses and said apologetically, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking about something just now and wasn't playing seriously." Natalia's face was full of question marks. Yu said straightforwardly, "Maybe if I play seriously, I won't be able to beat you." He thought that he was trying to coax her. However, in Natalia's eyes, it was a provocation. She pouted and said, "What do you mean by that? If you're not playing seriously, then wouldn't I be killed by your finger if you play seriously?" "That's not necessarily the case." Yu said seriously, "In this game, Xianxia is still better. I've never been his match." "Humph, why won't you go easy on me?" Natalia was obviously unhappy that she had lost. She threw the controller aside and hugged her knees, looking aggrieved. Yu pursed his lips. It was obvious that he was still thinking about something. Natalia suddenly stood up and ran upstairs. She was obviously a little angry. Hua Jin saw this. If it was in the past, he would have laughed. She must be angry, so he planned to coax her. She was obviously waiting for Yu to coax her. However, Yu was unmoved. He knew what Natalia's motive was. He could even imagine that she was waiting for him to coax her. Alice had previously warned him not to be alone with Natalia. He shouldn't create this opportunity, and he shouldn't let it happen. Yu suspected that Natalia wanted to play the game with him so that she would lose on purpose and run to the room to wait for him to find her. This way, the two of them would have a chance to be alone. He believed Alice's warning. Hence, when Natalia ran upstairs, he didn't do anything. He switched to the game disc and started playing casually. Time passed by slowly. Upstairs, Natalia couldn't take it anymore. She initially thought that Yu would not bear to see her go upstairs in a fit of pique, so he would follow her upstairs and coax her. However, after waiting for so long, she still didn't see anyone. She felt strange. Alice's guess was right. The Natalia in front of him wasn't Natalia at all. She was Natalia, who had taken over her body. She had tried so hard to be alone with Yu. Alice had already seen through her and told Yu in advance. Yu naturally believed her. He didn't believe that Alice would harm him. However, he had already felt that there was something wrong with Natalia. Natalia couldn't sit still anymore. She carefully pushed open the door to the room and felt her way to the staircase. From her angle, she saw Yu sitting on the sofa in the living room. He was holding the controller and looking at the game calmly. She widened her eyes in surprise. He seemed to be unmoved by her anger. In fact, he looked cold. What was going on? Chapter 42:16. Natalia could tell that Yu Yu had special feelings for Natalia. It was not the kind of pure friendship between children. It was not exactly love, either, but she could not pinpoint exactly what kind of feelings it was. She only knew that Natalia had a special place in the boy's heart. She took advantage of this. Natalia secretly bit her finger. She was close to the time limit that Professor Romanka had set for her. She had to complete this task as soon as possible. Otherwise, she did not know how to explain it to Professor Romanka. Xianxia walked from the kitchen to the living room. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of Natalia hiding in the corner of the stairs. She pretended not to see her and walked to Yu Yu's side. She handed him a glass of fresh apple juice. Your favorite apple juice. Yu Yu loved to eat apples. In addition, Alice had given Xianxia a nutritional formula that required Yu Yu to eat 3 apples a day to replenish his nutrients. Strengthening his physique was Yu Yu's top priority now. However, just thinking about eating 3 big apples made his cheeks hurt. In the beginning, Yu Yu could not insist on this at all. It was already hard enough to chew on 1 apple, let alone 3. He couldn't do it at all. Thus, Xianxia thought of squeezing 3 apples into juice. It was sweet and sour, and Yu Yu liked it too. This way, it would be the best of both worlds. When Xianxia handed him the apple juice, she lowered her voice and said, "She is at the stairs, secretly watching you." Yu Yu heard this and took the apple juice without batting an eyelid. He also secretly looked in the direction of the stairs. Natalia did not notice that Yu Yu was secretly sizing her up. Yu Yu suddenly hooked his finger at Xianxia. "She is Natalia." "Huh. How did you know?" "Alice told me." Yu Yu continued. "Alice did not allow me to be alone with Natalia. She was worried that Natalia knew how to hypnotize people." "Hypnotize people?" Xianxia heard this and her heart trembled. She recalled that time when Yu Yu was hypnotized and his personality was sealed. She even thought that Yu Yu's personality would never come back. Therefore, she was very nervous and could not help being careful. "Don't be nervous," Yu said. "I will protect myself. Just pretend that you did not hear anything." "Okay." Yu and Xianxia acted. And her. Hua Jin was focused on Yu Yu's game. And everyone seemed to be ignoring Natalia. Natalia was especially upset. Could it be that she had been seen through? Impossible. She had tried very hard to imitate Natalia's words and actions. How could she be seen through? However, Yu Yu's attitude towards her had turned cold. That was a fact. Natalia went back to the room. After waiting for a while, she fell asleep without realizing it. Alice was on the 3rd floor. She sent a WeChat message to Hua Jin. Hua Jin replied that he had gone to the room to take a look and found that Natalia had fallen asleep. Hence Alice said, "Let's take her home while she's asleep." Why? What if she wakes up? She won't wake up. Once a child of her age falls asleep, she won't wake up so easily. Chapter 42:17. Hua Jin carefully carried Natalia into the car and went home early. Alice finally came down from upstairs. When Yu Yu saw her, he immediately stood up and said without hiding anything, "I've noticed it too. Natalia's second personality is called Natalia, right?" "Yes, I remember mentioning this name to you. She seemed to be able to create an opportunity to be alone with me today." Yu Yu frowned. "What's going on? Have you finally noticed what's wrong with her?" Alice said honestly, "There aren't many clues now. I'm worried that Natalia's second personality is too shrewd and will realize that I'm observing her sooner or later. In this way, if she raises her guard, I won't be able to notice anything fishy about her." "Then are you sure that Gong Fan's disappearance has something to do with her?" When Alice heard this, she took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I'm just suspecting. But I feel that the possibility of it being related to her is very high. That's why I hope that you'll raise your guard so that you won't make the same mistake again." When Xianxia heard this, she couldn't help but hug Yu Yu tightly. Yu Yu looked up and saw Xianxia's forbearing gaze. He turned around and said to Alice, "How do you know about Gong Fan's current situation?" Alice was stunned. "What do you mean? You also know that Gong Fan has disappeared for too long. Did he really disappear, Or did something happen because of Natalia? Is she in danger? I want to ask you to help me find him. When Alice heard this, she was surprised. She said half jokingly, half seriously, "Isn't Gongfan's disappearance good news to you?" When Yu heard this, he was in a daze for a long time. Then he lowered his head and said in a low voice, "In the past, I probably thought that if Gongfan suddenly disappeared without a trace, it would be something to be happy about. At least, his departure wasn't accompanied by too much pain. But now I don't think so." Why? Alice didn't know if she should ask, but she still wanted to know more about Yu's feelings. Yu said honestly, "Whether it's him or me, we're all part of this life. Without him, I'm not me, and without me he's not him. We was the name, the miracle that was formed. I couldn't lose him. Mommy couldn't lose him either. Yue Yao couldn't lose him. Xiao Yichen couldn't lose him either. If he was so important, why did he disappear just like that? In the past, I felt that he had occupied my body for too long, so I couldn't spend more time with Mommy. Now, if he can hear me, I want to say that I'm willing to sacrifice more time for him to come back. If he's willing, I can let Mommy tell him a bedtime story every night and sing to him." As Yu spoke, her tears fell unknowingly. When Xianxia saw this, her heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. Her heart ached as she hugged him. Yu, don't be sad." "How can I not be sad?" Chapter 42:18. Yu suppressed his sadness and said, "He didn't say goodbye and left without saying goodbye. No one knows where he went. Every night, I would call his name repeatedly before I went to bed, but he didn't seem to hear me. I was thinking, where did he go? Did he not want Mommy and me anymore? He made Mommy sad. I hate him." Xianxia was helpless and sad. She secretly wiped his tears and said, Yu, don't be so sad." Yu still said angrily, "If he doesn't come back, then forget it." "He won't." She cupped his little face and rubbed against it affectionately. "If he doesn't come back, it's okay too. But Mommy must really want him to come home." Yu looked into her eyes seriously. "That day, I heard everything." Yu lowered his eyes in disappointment. "Mommy must miss him a lot, right? I didn't protect him well. It's my fault." Alice furrowed her brows, feeling a little sad. "We can't make a conclusion too early. No one knows what Natalia did to Gongfan, but Gongfan's personality shouldn't disappear so easily." Yu looked at her in surprise. "How can you be so sure? If Gongfan's personality disappeared so easily, the field of multiple personality disorder wouldn't be one of the most complicated topics in the world. There are countless people with multiple personality disorder who haven't been cured. If the problem can be solved so easily, it doesn't exist at all." Alice continued, "Moreover, Natalia has multiple personality disorder. She's a patient herself. How can she cure other patients?" When Yu heard this, he asked tentatively, "So you're saying that Gongfan's personality can't disappear?" "With the clues and scientific evidence I have now, it's impossible for him to disappear." Alice gave a definite conclusion. When Yu heard this, his brows finally relaxed. He suddenly said, "If you need to do research, I can do it any time. Since you said that there's a problem with my body, then if you want to study it, I can do it any time." Alice was a little embarrassed and said, "I want to, but your Mommy is not very assured. If I really want to study you, I'll need your guardian's permission." Xianxia looked hesitant. Even though he was now so familiar with Alice, even though the woman in front of him had once saved Gongjie's life and was absolutely a trustworthy person. However, she was still worried and would not easily hand Yu over to her. "I'm worried." Xianxia did not hide anything and said frankly, "I didn't know that you would do such research on him, but I can't be at ease if I just hand Yu over to you." Alice shrugged innocently with a helpless expression on her face. It was as if his gaze was saying, "Your Mommy will have to be convinced by you. I don't have the right to do it without her consent." Yu knew very well that Xianxia was worried about him. After all, they had been through so many life-and-death separations, she was not willing to take any more risks. It was not that she was worried about Alice. She was worried that Yu would be separated from her again because of some unforeseen event, or that he would not acknowledge her as his Mommy like before. Chapter 42:19. "Mommy, if you're by my side, then it'll be fine." Yu gently tugged at her sleeve and asked cautiously, "Let's try it once." Let's try it once, okay? Xianxia looked at Yu hesitantly and then looked at Alice. Alice placed her hand over her heart and said earnestly, "Don't worry, I won't dissect Yu. I'm only using the sleep test and hypnotizing method to find out more about Gong Fan." Xianxia hesitated for a while and finally nodded reluctantly. Alice hadn't expected her to agree. When Xianxia nodded, she was stunned. She had thought that Xianxia would reject her again, but she hadn't expected her to agree. She was stunned for a long time before she came back to her senses. Xianxia said to her seriously, "I trust you because Yu trusts you too." "Okay, I understand. Don't worry, I won't let you down." Sleep monitoring didn't require a huge device. Alice had brought a sleep monitoring device from the headquarters. That night, she rushed over early with the device. In the room, she instructed Yu to lie on the bed and put on a sleep monitoring headrest for him. She turned on the power and his brain waves were displayed on the small screen. "What's this?" "These are your brain waves." Then, is there any explanation for the sleep monitoring? Yu suddenly felt that he hadn't asked the right question. He asked again, "Why do you want to monitor my sleep?" "It monitors the frequency of your brain waves when you sleep. From the details of the frequency we can find many problems." Alice then said to him, "Go to sleep." "I can't sleep now." Alice was stunned. "Your mommy said that you usually sleep at this time. But wearing this device doesn't seem comfortable." Yu fiddled with the device on her head and frowned. "It feels quite uncomfortable." Alice carefully adjusted it for him again. "How about this?" "That's much better." Xianxia quickly walked into the room. When Yu saw her, his eyes lit up. "Why don't I ask Mommy to tell me some stories? Maybe I can fall asleep this way." "You don't have to tell me a story, just close your eyes. I want to monitor the quality of your sleep, including the degree and time of your sleep," Alice said. When Yu heard this, she felt bored and told her honestly, "Usually, it's Mommy who tells me stories. If I don't listen to her stories, I'll feel uncomfortable." "This means that you rely too much on your mommy. Can your mommy tell you bedtime stories for the rest of your life?" As Alice said this, she pushed him and urged him, "Close your eyes and sleep." When Yu heard this, he sighed like an old man and gently closed his eyes. When he lay down, he looked at the ceiling and closed his eyes slightly. Although he squinted his eyes, he didn't feel sleepy at all. Alice asked, "Don't you want to sleep?" "Yeah, I can't sleep," Yu mumbled. Although his eyes were closed, his eyelids were twitching violently. "Relax." Alice turned her head and looked at the monitor. On the screen, the frequency was jumping violently. This meant that Yu's mind was filled with thoughts and he was thinking about something. No wonder he wanted to listen to Xianxia's bedtime stories. Chapter 42:20. Do you let your thoughts run wild every night before you go to bed? Yes. What do you think about? Yu closed his eyes. He answered Alice's questions without holding anything back. "I think about Gong Fan and our future." Xianxia sat down at the side and quietly listened to the exchange of questions and answers between the two. It was in such a relaxed state that Yu was completely unguarded. Instead, he was able to tell her everything that was on his mind. "Do you like Gong Fan?" "So." "Do you hate him?" "I don't." "Then what kind of feelings do you have for him?" Yu pondered for a moment and finally let out a long sigh. "I owe him. I feel guilty." "Why?" "Because I was the one who forced him out. It's just that in the past, I've been chasing him away, trying to get him out of my body." Yu's eyelashes suddenly twitched violently. The frequency of the monitoring on the screen was getting faster and faster. "He suffered pain that he shouldn't have to suffer, but I was so cowardly that I avoided all of it. He suffered so much for me, but I saw him as an evil person. Actually, he's not a bad person. It's just that he has always received negative and repressed emotions. That's why he developed a dark personality. But not only did I not understand, I even..." When Xianxia heard this, she couldn't help but feel her heart ache. She covered her mouth tightly and felt extremely guilty. She didn't want Yu to hear her sobbing. She felt heartache, powerless, and uneasy. She knew what kind of childhood Yu had had. Back then, she had kept Yu by her side out of selfishness. However, she hadn't given him a peaceful childhood. She should have known. She didn't have the ability to give him a good childhood, but she had kept him by her side out of selfishness. It was all her fault. Xianxia felt lonely, but then she heard Alice ask, "Did you create him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because." Yu's calm brows furrowed slightly as a tear rolled down from the corner of her eye. "I feel lonely." Xianxia widened her eyes in shock. "Lonely? Why do I feel lonely?" "When I was young, everyone had parents, brothers, sisters, and so many friends. But I felt that I couldn't get along well with those children." "Why? Why can't we get along well?" "Because I keep feeling that their world is different from mine. Their parents would send them to school, and after school, someone would send them home. When they got home, they would have a warm dinner, but I didn't. I also want to have a father and a brother. I fantasize about having such a family, but I know that mommy is also very lonely. I shouldn't force so much. So I always imagined that I had an older brother, until one day, I felt that he had appeared." Do you remember what day it was? Chapter 42:21. Yu paused and his voice suddenly became gloomy. "When I fell asleep at night, I saw him in my dream. He was standing there alone, covered in injuries." "Was it Gong Fan?" "Yes, at that time, he didn't have a name. He didn't seem to see me, but I could see him standing in the dark world with a lonely gaze." Yu continued, "He didn't have any friends." Alice looked at him and suddenly asked softly, "Have you ever thought of being friends with him?" "No." Yu frowned and said uneasily, "I was afraid that he would snatch her from me." "Snatch from what?" "Mommy." Yu gradually looked exhausted. "Apart from mommy, I have nothing. I don't have any friends or family. I only have mommy. What if he snatches mommy away from me?" "So at that time, I hoped that he would die." Yu's voice suddenly became cold. "I hoped that he would never appear in my world again." Alice furrowed her brows and turned to look at Xianxia, only to see that the latter's face was already streaked with tears. "I'm sorry," she prayed in her heart. She didn't expect that his childhood experience would leave Yu with such a dark world in his heart. But, later on, I didn't want him to die. Yu was obviously in a difficult situation. He rubbed his eyes and turned over slightly. Alice immediately adjusted the blanket for him. "Why didn't you want him to die?" "Because mommy seems to like him a lot." Yu said seriously, "I also feel very guilty towards him. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have been able to bear the pressure of the darkness. I feel that Gong Fan is a real strong person. He stands in the dark and is so calm. He has suffered so much for me. It would be too cruel for me to chase him away. Mommy also loves him and loves him. So, I hope that he will stay. When we were young, he bore so much for me. Now that I'm bearing this for him, it's not worth mentioning." Actually, if you had told your mommy about what had happened to you back then, you wouldn't have had to go through all this. Yu suddenly sighed helplessly. "I don't want that. I don't want mommy to know about this." His resolute tone surprised Alice. "Why?" "Because I happened to hear mommy and grandpa mention that she regretted keeping me by her side. Perhaps it was because she saw that I didn't have a good childhood, so she wanted to send me back to daddy's side and let me live a better life. If I let her know that I'm not doing well, she'll definitely send me away." "You can't bear to leave your mommy." "Even if I die." Yu's lips parted. "I want to die in mommy's arms too. I'm not going anywhere." When Xianxia heard this, she stood up gently and walked to the balcony. She lowered her head weakly. After about a quarter of an hour, Alice also came out. She leaned against the railing and casually lit a cigarette. The smell of smoke drifted into Xianxia's nose, but she didn't find it pungent. She even gasped and choked a few times. "Why did you come out?" Alice raised her eyebrows. "You can't bear it?" When he said those words just now, what kind of state was he in? Chapter 42:22. Goodness gracious. Xianxia was extremely vexed. What had she done? Yu was still so young. Why did he have to go through such a cruel experience? "It's all my fault." Xianxia covered her face sadly and said in a daze, "At that time, I shouldn't have kept him by my side out of selfishness. I clearly didn't have the means to give him a wonderful childhood. I shouldn't have brought him back. It's all my fault. It's all my fault." Alice looked at Xianxia's sad expression and felt her heart ache. She didn't have a child, but she could understand this feeling. She imagined that she wanted to give him the best thing in the world. However, the reality was, she didn't have the ability to do so. Alice smiled helplessly and said plainly, "Who said that you didn't give him the best thing in the world?" Xianxia looked up with tears in her eyes and looked at her in surprise. Alice smiled. To him, aren't you the best thing in the world? Xianxia was stunned. She opened her mouth in surprise. When she came back to her senses, she gently wiped away her tears. When she heard the conversation between Yu and Alice while he was half awake, she felt heartbroken. However, when she heard what Alice said now, she felt a little conflicted. Don't give him what he thinks is good, and don't blindly put all the blame on yourself. Life is irreversible. Everything can't be overturned. Accept everything calmly. Thank you, Xianxia said. To think that I was still wary of you. I didn't expect you to be so much more mature than me. If you care too much about someone, you'll naturally be confused. As Alice said this, she flipped through the printed monitoring report and took a drag on her cigarette. Xianxia looked at it. There were all kinds of complicated lines on it. She couldn't understand it and asked curiously, "What is this?" "This is the frequency of his sleep quality. This is before he fell asleep, and this is after he fell asleep." Alice pointed at the paper and said to her, "Did you notice that after he fell asleep, the frequency of his brain waves became stronger?" "What does this mean?" "This means," Alice frowned and said, "this means that his sleep quality is very poor." "Poor sleep quality?" "Yes," Alice said, "patients with dual personality are most afraid of poor sleep quality. If the quality of sleep was not good, the negative mental pressure would be too strong, and it would be very easy for one's mental power to collapse. A person's willpower was often very weak. Sometimes it could be very strong and seemingly indestructible. But often, the more indestructible a person looked, the easier it was for a straw to crush him. Therefore, having a good sleep quality was also the only way to maintain a good mental state. When people don't sleep well, it's easy for them to get anxious." Xianxia nodded. "No wonder. I also felt that Yu's mental strength had become very poor recently. During the day, he was always depressed and looked like he had a lot on his mind. Yu is very dependent on you. But this kind of dependence might not be a good thing. Sooner or later, he will have his own family. If he continues to rely on you like this, it won't be a good thing." Chapter 42-23. Xianxia nodded solemnly. "I know that too. I also feel that he shouldn't rely on me so much. However, Yu is already much more independent than before. Actually, I can understand the bond between the two of you. After all, for a very long time, at least since he was born, you have always been by his side. Hence, his dependence on you can't be replaced by anyone else. Similarly, your dependence on him can't be replaced by anyone else. But have you ever thought that he can't rely on you for the rest of his life?" Xianxia hummed in acknowledgement. "I understand now. However, the most important thing now is to find out what exactly happened to him. Do you want Gong Fan to come back?" Alice asked seriously. Xianxia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at her hesitantly. Alice sighed. "I can tell that you are very hesitant. On one hand, you can't bear to part with Gong Fan. On the other hand, you don't want to be a burden to Yu, right?" "Yes. Yu only feels guilty towards Gong Fan. What about you? Apart from guilt, is there anything else?" Alice's question made Xianxia fall into a daze. In her mind, she seemed to have already imagined Gong Fan snuggling in her arms and hugging her helplessly. She still remembered that in front of others, he had always been arrogant and unruly. Only in front of her, there was a hint of vulnerability that others couldn't detect. "Mommy, don't ever leave me behind." He was afraid that she would leave him behind. Xianxia understood that the choice was in her hands now. Did Yu really care that much about Gong Fan? Not necessarily. He probably felt more guilty towards Gong Fan. However, more than that, he was afraid that she would be sad. Yu probably had many ways to make Gong Fan disappear and send him to the land of exile. Even if Gong Fan was unwilling to leave, if she said, "I don't want you anymore," Gong Fan would definitely leave disheartened. But, The most contradictory thing was that she would rather Gong Fan live in her world than in Yu Yu's. If it were her, she would be willing to bear all the pain. However, if it was Yu Yu, she couldn't bear to let Yu Yu carry so much burden. She also had no right to interfere with Yu Yu's thoughts. If Yu Yu was unwilling to coexist with Gong Fan, then it would be meaningless for her to force him. Moreover, if she put Yu Yu in a difficult position, Yu Yu would be the one to suffer. Thinking of this, Xianxia's heart ached. Her hands fell weakly and she sighed. Forget it, I can't make Gong Fan stay. No matter what, I just want Yu Yu to be fine. I can't put so much pressure on Yu Yu because of my own thoughts. If you must force me to make a decision, I'm willing to. Xianxia almost could not go on with her words. She looked up and looked at Alice seriously. Holding back her tears, she choked and said, I'm willing to give up Gong Fan. This sentence was undoubtedly a knife to her heart. But she had no choice. She could not bear to see Yu Yu on the brink of agony. Give up. Xianxia persuaded herself. She thought that Yu Yu would definitely understand her decision. Chapter 42-24. Can I perform hypnosis on Yu Yu tomorrow? Hypnosis? She could tell that Xianxia was extremely nervous when she heard the word hypnosis. She looked at her warily. Alice laughed when she saw this. Don't tell me you're thinking that I'm going to hypnotize Yu Yu and make him lose his memory again? You won't. Xianxia was just too sensitive. After all, she didn't have a good impression of the word hypnosis. The first time I performed hypnosis on Yu Yu, I didn't get your consent. But it's different now. I'll seek your opinion now. If you agree, I can perform the hypnosis then. Why are you performing the hypnosis? Xianxia asked with concern. She had to understand the nature and purpose of the hypnosis before she could come to a conclusion. Alice said, I want to find Gong Fan. The hypnosis was scheduled for 1:30 p.m. the next day. Alice had chosen this time because it was the time when people would feel sleepy after a full meal. At the same time, it was also the time when people would feel most relaxed. There was a high chance that the hypnosis would succeed at this time. Yu Yu naturally agreed and was willing to undergo the hypnosis. She also wanted to know where Gong Fan was hiding. The hypnosis process may produce some painful images. Can you withstand it when you enter the depths of your dreams? Yu Yu didn't think much of it and said casually, no matter how painful it is, can it be as painful as the first time I was hypnotized? Alice couldn't help but feel guilty. She cleared her throat awkwardly and didn't say a word. Yu Yu turned to Xianxia and said, Mommy, I'm going to start the hypnosis. Don't be here anymore. Be good and wait outside the door. Don't you want me to be here? Before Yu Yu could reply, Alice immediately explained, when you perform the hypnosis, it's best not to have a third party present. Otherwise, the hypnotized person will be easily disturbed. All right. I understand. Xianxia stood up and silently left the room. She respected Alice's opinion. Yu Yu lay down on the recliner. From this angle, the afternoon sun shone on her body, especially on her face. It was warm and moist, and for a moment, she felt sleepy. Alice casually placed a metronome next to her. She sat beside Yu Yu and talked to him softly. Her voice became softer and softer. Gradually, Yu Yu's eyelids became heavier and heavier. Relax. Close your eyes and imagine yourself lying on a patch of grass with the wind gently blowing on your face. Alice's voice was bewitching, guiding Yu Yu's thoughts in the direction she wanted. Yu Yu finally closed her eyes and her breathing gradually became even. He successfully entered the dreamland. When he opened his eyes again, he realized that he was really lying on a patch of grass. There was a blue sky and white clouds. There was a gentle breeze and the sun surrounded him. It was warm and comfortable. He just lay there freely and couldn't bear to move for a moment. What do you see? Alice's voice was still accompanying him. Yu Yu opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. He saw a kite floating in the sky, flying higher and higher. I see a kite. A kite? Chapter 42-25. It's Gong Fan? Yu Yu blurted out. Alice was stunned. Gong Fan? How could it be? In the dream, Yu Yu was already running toward Gong Fan without a care for anything else. He was standing on the top of the mountain and could see far away. From his angle, he could easily see the person who was running and flying a kite at the foot of the mountain. He had the same attire, clothes, and face as him. However, his expression was cold. Even when he was flying the kite, his face did not have the innocence that a child of his age should have. Instead, he was looking at the kite in the sky silently. From time to time, he would step back and tug gently. Gong Fan. Yu did not expect to see him. He immediately ran towards him happily. Gong Fan. He was getting closer. It was as if there was wind under his feet. He quickly came to Gong Fan's side and called out softly. Gong Fan seemed to have heard his voice. He turned around and looked at him coldly, but a sense of disgust appeared in his heart. Why are you here? His indifferent gaze was so unfamiliar that it made Yu freeze on the spot. Yu was surprised and distant. Although he did not have any direct contact with Gong Fan due to various reasons, at least they would communicate through the notebook. He could tell that Gong Fan was very friendly to him. However, the child in front of him was different. His eyes were filled with hostility and coldness. What's wrong with you? Yu moved closer to him and tentatively reached out to touch him. Don't touch me. Gong Fan flung his hand away and turned to leave. When Yu saw this, he was stunned for a moment and immediately chased after him. However, just as he took a few steps, it was as if he had crossed a boundary. The entire world instantly turned dark. Gong Fan. Yu? Alice held Yu's hand and kept calling him. However, Yu did not respond. She widened her eyes in shock. She did not expect her hypnosis to go out of control for the first time in history. Could Yu not hear her voice? No, she had to end this hypnosis. Alice would not allow anything to go wrong with this hypnosis. I'll count to 3. Yu, wake up and walk out. 3, 2, 1. She played the metronome gently and snapped her fingers in front of Yu's face. Wake up. There was still no reaction from the boy after a long while. Alice stood up abruptly in frustration. Oh no! It seemed to have gone out of control. How could this happen? Could it be that Yu had been lured into a dream that she could not enter? In the dream, Yu was in a dark world. It was like a void of chaos. He could not see anything clearly. He forced himself to calm down quickly and looked around. It was as if he was standing on top of an abyss. At first glance, it was like a bottomless black hole. He could not see the end. He tried to take a step forward. However, he stepped on nothing and his body suddenly fell. He felt a strong centrifugal force. He felt as if he was falling towards the end of the abyss. It was a dream. It was a dream. It was a dream. As he fell, he kept telling himself that it was a dream and that he should not believe it. Once he believed that it was a dream, he would be trapped in it. Chapter 42:26. This is a dream. Don't believe everything in a dream. However, even though he kept warning himself, he could still hear the howling of the wind. He could even feel his face being scraped by the wind. He suspected that this was not a dream and could not help but waver. He couldn't tell if this was a dream or reality. Just as he wavered, he suddenly saw a murky black river at the end of his vision. He did not even have time to call for help before he fell into the river and drowned. The moment he hit the water, he felt as if his head was about to split open. The feeling of drowning was so real that it could not be explained. It was as if he was drowning in real life. The murky river water continuously poured into his nostrils and lips. The stench was suffocating. Ah! He opened his mouth wanting to call for help. He almost instinctively wanted to escape from this terrifying dream. However, he could only feel himself drifting along with the river water. The whole world was dizzy. Help! Help! Alice could hear the broken sounds coming from Yu's mouth from time to time. She suddenly sat down beside him again and put the brainwave detector on his head to check the frequency of his brainwaves. When she saw that the frequency of his brainwaves in reality on the screen had become chaotic, she felt uneasy for a moment. How could this be? Yu. Alice held his hand tightly, trying to let him feel her strength. Wake up, wake up. What you see is a dream. It's a dream that doesn't exist. Gong Fan! Yu suddenly cried out in surprise. His voice was hoarse, but a name came out clearly. In the dream, he drifted along with the river water to a deserted place. The river water gradually became shallow. He crawled to the shore pathetically. Just as he grabbed onto a rock by the shore, he suddenly heard a series of cold footsteps. Rustle, rustle. Yu Yu heard the sound clearly. He looked up in shock and saw Gong Fan walking toward him with a numb face. He was shocked to find that Gong Fan was hiding a sharp dagger in his hand. He was so scared that he suffocated and instinctively said, "Gong Fan!" Gong Fan walked towards him without saying a word, without making any sound. However, Yu Yu was keenly aware that this Gong Fan seemed to be a little different from the real Gong Fan. His face was cold and his eyes were dark. There was not a trace of life in them, as if he was a walking corpse. What are you doing?" Yu Yu kept retreating. Seeing that Gong Fan was still closing in on him, he suddenly felt an inexplicable fear. He could actually imagine the sharp dagger piercing through his chest, causing blood to spurt out. "No, don't!" He suddenly crawled up from the ground, turned around and fled. And the footsteps behind him gradually quickened as he caught up. Yu Yu was so shocked that she sucked in a breath of cold air and ran with all her might towards the end of the road. "No. What are you doing?" Even if this was a dream, it was too realistic. Even though Yu Yu could still vaguely tell that the scene in front of him was a dream, it was beyond what he could bear. Even if it was a dream, he did not want to continue. Chapter 42:27. Yu Yu kept running forward. His willpower was crumbling in such a scary dream. There was no way he could survive. Behind him, the sound of footsteps became more intense. Yu Yu could even feel that the hurried footsteps were right behind him. How could this be? Could it be that the dream had started to collapse? Had it completely gone out of control? Don't come over. Don't. Yu Yu kept waving his hands. His face was flushed red because of the suffocation. Xianxia, who was outside the door, heard Yu Yu mumbling uneasily. She opened the door a little and saw Alice frowning and looking at Yu Yu in fear. She took a step forward and wanted to enter the room. Alice looked up at her and said, "Sure. You can come in but don't speak." "Okay." Xianxia walked into the room and saw Yu Yu lying on the chair with a red face. Her heart ached and she asked anxiously, "What happened?" "The hypnosis is out of control." "Out of control?" Xianxia almost shrieked out loud. She didn't know what it meant to lose control. But looking at Yu Yu's painful expression, even Alice couldn't imagine how Yu Yu could break free from the nightmare. "The dream is out of control," Alice said with a serious expression. "This means that I can't control his dream anymore." "What does that mean?" Xianxia was confused. She only felt that Yu Yu was in a terrible situation. She was afraid that Yu Yu would end up like Gong Fan. She couldn't accept such a blow. Alice gasped. "I suspect that he met Gong Fan in the dream." Yu Yu felt himself being pinned to the ground by a powerful force. He struggled with all his might and finally managed to break free. However, he saw a dead end right in front of him. Behind him, the strong force grabbed his collar again. Yu Yu turned around abruptly and finally saw the face of the person in front of him. Gong Fan stood expressionlessly in front of him, his hands gripping his collar tightly. His expression was filled with hostility. Gong Fan. It was indeed him. Yu Yu was in disbelief. He had never thought that Gong Fan, who had always been friendly with him, would show such a terrifying side to him. "What are you trying to do?" Gong Fan stared at him coldly. Suddenly, his lips curled into a contemptuous smile. "What do I want to do?" "You." Yu Yu looked at the rising murderous aura in his eyes and felt a chill run down her spine. He had never been afraid of anything, and he was seldom really afraid of anyone or anything. However, the young man standing in front of him with a cold gaze finally made him feel a sense of fear. "You control the real world of this body, and I control the dream world of this body. In the real world you are the king. But here you can't win against me." In the next second, Gong Fan suddenly raised his hand. The sharp dagger in his hand suddenly glowed with a cruel light. "No!" Yu Yu shook his head frantically. "Don't do this. You can't do this." He didn't understand why Gong Fan had become so violent and cruel. This wasn't like him. Chapter 42:28. "Pfft. You're not allowed to invade my territory." Gong Fan's eyes were red as he ruthlessly stabbed him with the knife. Even though it was a dream, the pain of having his chest pierced through was still heart-wrenching. It was so real that it could not be explained. Yu Yu was in so much pain that he frowned and almost couldn't speak. He could only feel the sharp tip of the dagger piercing through his chest as if it was going to pierce through his thin body. One stab after another until blood splattered everywhere. Yu woke up abruptly and opened his eyes. He took in a deep breath of cold air until his blurry vision gradually cleared up. He finally saw clearly. At that moment, he was lying on the bed with the ceiling light hanging above his head. Xianxia and Xianxia were standing nervously in front of the bed. Alice was staring at him intently. She was drenched in cold sweat because of his repeated screams. Yu looked out of the window. It was already dusk. He fell asleep and unknowingly struggled in his dream for an entire afternoon. Even though he had slept, this dream made him even more exhausted. He leaned against the head of the bed weakly and his body was already drenched in cold sweat. Xianxia sat by the bed and looked at his pale face. Her heart ached and she felt uneasy. Yu was extremely tired. That dream was so real that he was still in a daze when he woke up. He recalled Gong Fan's ruthless and cold face in the dream and couldn't help but tremble. Xianxia glanced at Alice. Seeing that Alice had acquiesced, she immediately walked up to Yu and hugged him tightly. Yu, did you have a nightmare? Don't be afraid. Mommy is here. Mommy is with you. Yu hugged Xianxia weakly. He finally broke down and tears rolled down his face. Xianxia rarely saw him cry. When she saw his tears, she was even more helpless. What happened? Mommy. Gong Fan. Gong Fan. Yu pursed her lips and said with difficulty, he wants to kill me. Ah! Xianxia let out a short ah and her eyes widened in shock. Alice immediately stepped forward and asked anxiously, what did you dream of? Do you remember? Yu refused to say anything. He buried his face in Xianxia's arms and shook his head. Don't ask. I don't want to say anything. Seeing this, Alice gave up. She turned around and said to Xianxia and Xianxia, Xianxia is here to keep them company. Let's go out first. Let him calm down first. Xianxia pouted and said, I also want to stay and keep Yu company. Xianxia turned around and coaxed him gently. Chen, be good. Go out first. It's fine with Mommy here. Okay then. Mommy will keep Yu company. Xianxia was very obedient. With Xianxia's words, he obediently left the room with Xianxia. Although Xianxia did not say anything and was not good at expressing concern verbally, Xianxia could tell from his eyes that he was very worried. She smiled and said, It's okay. I'll take good care of him. Don't worry too much. Okay. Xianxia did not say anything else and left the room with Xianxia. Soon, only Xianxia and Yu were left in the room. After a long time, Xianxia finally could not hold back and asked worriedly, What did you mean by what you said just now? Chapter 42:29. Yu, you can tell Mommy what you dreamed of. Mommy will keep it a secret and won't tell anyone. After her repeated coaxing, Yu finally raised his head. She saw that his eyes were unbelievably red. He was crying. Yu had always been like a little adult. He was mature, rational, and responsible. It was rare to see him cry. Seeing him cry, Xianxia's heart ached even more. She hugged him tightly and said helplessly, It's okay if you don't want to talk about it. Mommy is just too worried about you. He wanted to kill me. Xianxia was secretly shocked, but on the surface, she maintained a calm expression. Gong Fan, I dreamed that he was chasing me with a knife. Then, he pressed me against the wall and stabbed me in the heart. Yu recounted in a trembling voice. Even though he didn't add too much detail, just imagining that scene made him shudder uncontrollably. Xianxia found it hard to believe. However, since he said that it was a dream, she comforted him and said, You said it was a dream. A dream is a dream. Don't take it seriously. I kept thinking that just now. Yu sniffed. His voice was still broken. But I still feel very scared. I keep feeling that although it was a dream, it was so real. I'm so tired, but I don't dare to sleep. I'm afraid that if I fall asleep, I'll have that dream again. Mommy, you said that the person who stabbed me with a knife, was it really Gong Fan? You said it was a dream. A dream is a dream. Reality is reality. You can't mix the two together. Since it's a dream and you're awake, forget everything in the dream. But, Mommy, my sixth sense tells me that that person was Gong Fan. He really wanted to kill me in the dream. When Xianxia heard this, she couldn't help but hug him tightly. How can you kill someone in a dream? Even if a person dies 1,000 times in a dream, he won't die. But Yu was still feeling conflicted. That feeling was worse than death. Mommy, that dream felt so real. No matter how much I told myself that it was just a dream and that I shouldn't believe it so easily, I felt so tired after having such a dream. Even breathing felt exhausting. When Xianxia heard this, she felt as if a knife was being twisted in her heart. It was so painful that she almost couldn't breathe normally. She gently kissed Yu's forehead and said to him, You have to be well. Mommy really doesn't know what to do. In front of him, Xianxia felt a deep sense of powerlessness. She wanted to protect him, but she didn't know how. Ever since Yu was born, her life had never been peaceful. Ever since he was born, he had been in poor health. Then, he found out about his dual personality. Xianxia couldn't imagine how painful Yu's life was. However, what really made her heart ache was that Yu would rather bear such pain than let her know and make her worry. Alice said that Yu was very dependent on her. However, Xianxia knew very well that she was even more dependent on Yu. She wanted to be close to him and understand what kind of life a person with dual personality lived. Because just listening to Yu's description was enough to make her tremble with fear. I'm sorry, Xianxia choked with tears and said. Mommy didn't take good care of you, didn't protect you. Chapter 42:30. Xianxia stayed in the room with Yu until it was late at night. Xianxia entered the room. Even though Xianxia didn't say anything, Yu could sense that Xianxia was very tired. Hence he stopped pestering her and urged, Mommy, go to sleep. Xianxia was still worried. She continued hugging him and showed no signs of letting go. Xianxia saw this and said helplessly, Mommy, you're obviously looking down on me. Don't worry. I'll keep Yu company. If he doesn't want to sleep, I'll play games with him. If he wants to sleep, I won't disturb him. Yu pouted and said, I don't want to sleep, and I don't want to play games. He had no interest in games. They were too retarded. However, he didn't want to sleep so early either. Even though he was very tired, and the afternoon nap had been even more tiring because of the nightmare, he still didn't want to sleep. He was worried that if he fell asleep, it would be a series of nightmares. He was afraid that his mental state wouldn't be able to withstand it. Xianxia said, Then I'll go to the study with you to read. Okay. Yu said to Xianxia, Mommy, go to sleep. If you don't rest well, how can you take care of me? Don't worry, I'll be fine. Even though Xianxia was still worried, she nodded reluctantly because Xianxia was around. Moreover, she was also tired. Hence, she stood up and reminded Xianxia to take good care of Yu. Then, she reluctantly returned to her room. After Xianxia left, Yu didn't go to the study. Instead, he lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling without saying anything. Xianxia saw that he was lying down and asked curiously, You look very tired. Your eyes are red. Aren't you going to sleep? I don't want to sleep. Afraid of nightmares. Xianxia smiled. I often have nightmares too, but no matter how realistic they are, they can't be real. I think it's probably because you're under too much pressure. That's why you're having nightmares with such strong negative energy. Yu turned to look at him. She furrowed her brows and looked a little anxious. Do you really understand what it's like to have a nightmare? Xianxia was stunned. If it's possible, I don't want to have such a scary dream anymore. Yu closed her eyes and opened them weakly. Because he didn't sleep well, his mind was in a trance. Once a person didn't have a good sleep, they would become abnormally anxious. Even someone as gentle as Yu was a little impatient. She slammed the pillow on the bed onto the cupboard. Xianxia was shocked by her sudden action, but he didn't dare to say anything. He was afraid that if he said something careless, it would make Yu even more anxious. Hence, he obediently kept quiet. Yu's temper gradually went out of control. He flipped over, grabbed all the blankets, and wrapped them around his body. His entire body was covered by the blankets. Xianxia looked at him helplessly but didn't say anything. Instead, he walked over to the cupboard and took out another blanket. He didn't dare to disturb Yu. Carefully, he laid the blanket on the bed. Then, he climbed onto it and curled up pitifully. Noticing the cautious movements beside him, Yu lifted the blanket to take a look, only to see his older brother's uneasy look. No matter how angry he was, he could not help but be amused. Chapter 42:31. Xiao Yichen glanced at him and thought to himself, "Isn't that the case?" In any case, he felt that his status in the family was rather low. If anyone bullied him, he could only silently suffer. Other than his father, he could only argue with them. Whether it was Xianxia, Yu, Yueyao, or Lisa. He was the second oldest man in the family after his father. As the second oldest man in the family, of course, he had to be more magnanimous. Especially when it came to Yu and Yueyao, he had to be more lenient. For some reason, when Yu saw Xiao Yichen looking at him innocently, he broke into laughter. "Brother, do I always bully you? I feel like you've become a punching bag." When Xiao Yichen heard this, his eyelids twitched. Yu's tone suddenly became gentle, and he was momentarily stunned. Okay. I won't bully you anymore. Otherwise, you'll always think that I'm bullying you." Xiao Yichen pursed his lips and said in an old-fashioned manner, "Well, I'm your older brother. Also, when you were in mommy's stomach, I was always fighting with you for nutrients. When you were born, your body was already weak." The more he spoke, the lower his voice became. Other people might not be able to understand Xiao Yichen's feelings. He vaguely realized that Yu's poor health might have something to do with him. When he was in Xiangshi's stomach, he must have been the most domineering one, fighting with his twin brother for nutrients. Therefore, he felt an indescribable sense of guilt towards Yu. If it wasn't for him, Yu might have been very healthy. At the very least, he wouldn't have wasted his childhood in the hospital. He could have been like other children, flying kites outside every day and playing with other children. He wouldn't have had to watch helplessly. Xiao Yichen suddenly recalled, "I remember playing a horror game in the past. The main characters in the game were a pair of twin sisters." Twin sisters? Yeah. According to the ancient customs of many countries, the firstborn twin is considered the younger brother or sister, and the lastborn twin is the elder brother or sister. Oh? Why does it say that? Xiao Yichen said, "I read a report saying that medical science believes that the firstborn twin should be the younger brother or sister. Since the second twin is born in the womb, it means that they develop earlier. The second twin's the second twin is closer to the uterus, therefore, they're born first." I see. When he heard this, he couldn't help but find it interesting. According to this logic, I should be the elder brother. Yu stroked his chin and came to this conclusion with a straight face. In that game, it's the same. Those who are born first are the younger ones, and those who are born later are the older ones. No wonder I'm more mature than you. Xiao Yichen's game was called Zero Red Butterfly. In the game, there was an ancient village, Jieshan Village, which was built at the entrance of the Yellow Spring. In order to suppress the hollow that was humming at the entrance of the Yellow Spring, they held a ceremony to sacrifice the twins as Hongji. Chapter 42:32. When the power suppressing the void weakens, they must sacrifice the red Ji. Otherwise, when the void's resentment erupts, it will lead to the destruction of the village. Coincidentally, the village would give birth to a Gemini every certain period. In the village's knowledge, the Gemini was originally one person, but was produced separately in order to be the red Ji in the red funeral ritual. Therefore, the villagers believed that in the red funeral ritual, when one of the Gemini killed the other, the Gemini would merge into one and release a powerful force. This force could suppress the voids and protect the village. It was a game that Xiao Yichen played a long time ago, but for some reason, when he saw that it was a Gemini setting, he couldn't help but buy it. At the beginning of the game, there was a pair of Gemini sisters. The older sister, Amakura Ing, broke her leg when she played with her younger sister, Amakura Ni. Amakura Ni discovered that her older sister was chasing after a red butterfly. Amakura Ni chased after her older sister and accidentally crossed a barrier, entering a village that had disappeared from the map. In the process of searching for her older sister, she also learned about the village's secret. It turned out that the village had disappeared a long time ago. After the Toshiro family completed the last successful ceremony, the village held the red funeral ceremony again. This time, it was held by the Tachibana family's twins, Mu Yu and her older brother, Shu Yu. The two of them were kind and had deep feelings for each other. However, during the ceremony, Shu Yu couldn't do anything to Mu Yu, so she was killed by the ceremony and thrown into the void. Although Mu Yu was indeed killed during the ceremony, Shu Yu's longing for Mu Yu was too strong, so the red funeral ceremony failed and the void wasn't suppressed. In fact, this kind of red sacrifice that was held regularly was called the Yang sacrifice. When the Yang sacrifice failed, a Yin sacrifice had to be held. It was used to temporarily prevent the resentment of the void from exploding, so as to buy time for the next Yang sacrifice. The content of the Yin sacrifice was to turn the sacrificial person into a wedge, like a human pillar, and then throw him into the void. If both the Yang funeral ceremony and the Yin funeral ceremony failed, there would be a great payback, which was the moment of destruction. After the Yin funeral ceremony, they had to prepare for the next ceremony. The next ceremony was held by the village chief, He Eyes, who was the head of the ceremony. He Eyes had a pair of twin sisters. After his 2 daughters were born, he was certain that these 2 daughters had come to this world with the mission of offering sacrifices. The elder sister was called Ba Chong, who was born later, and the younger sister was called Sha Chong, who was born earlier. They were the Tao Tsong sisters before reincarnation. Shu Yu didn't want the same tragedy to happen to the He Eyes sisters, so she wanted to ask someone to take the sisters away from the village. Shu Yu had promised Mu Yu not to let the same thing happen again. After asking the folklorist Zhong Fong to take the 2 sisters away, Shu Yu thought that he had fulfilled his promise with Mu Yu. Unable to let go of Mu Yu's death, he finally hanged himself in the confinement room. However, what he didn't know was that the only one who had truly escaped from the village was his sister, Yachi. His sister accidentally slipped down the hill and broke her leg. She was found by the villagers. Chapter 42-33. In fact, she was willing to accept the sacrifice because according to legend, if the sacrifice was completed, she would be able to become one with Yachi. She hoped that Yachi would kill her. However, Yachi did not return until the day of the sacrifice. On the day of the sacrificial ceremony, due to the lack of a Gemini witch, the despairing Sha Zhong was hung with a rope and thrown into the void. However, there was no room for mistakes in the ceremony. The one who killed Sha Zhong was not Yachi Zhong, but it still could not prevent the resentment in the void from erupting. Thus, a mistake in the ceremony led to the opening of the void, resulting in the moment of disaster. Thus, Sha Zhong descended with resentment and hatred, killing the surviving villagers one by one. As he watched the villagers die, he laughed wildly. On the way out of the village, Yachi looked for food. By the time he returned, the village had already disappeared. Due to the seal of the void being completely removed, the resentful spirits in the destroyed village overflowed from the void. Once people breathed in the miasma, they would see the yellow springs and go crazy until they died. The village that was surrounded by Su had a dark night that no one could escape. From the outside, the village looked like a forest surrounded by fog. However, once someone was lured in, they would never return. Thus, it was called the village that disappeared from the map. One day, many years later, the Tao Tsong sisters, who had not returned for many years, came to the forest that they had not been in for a long time. Due to their strong spiritual perception, they encountered Cocoon, who was similar to Sha Zhong's sister. They were lured to the village that disappeared from the map. The worried sister, Su, chased after them. The sister was the reincarnation of the previous life sister, Sha Zhong. She was lured back to the village. In the ending of the game, Tao Tsong Ni replaced Yachi in the previous life and completed the sacrifice, killing the sister. At the end of the game, Xiao Yichen was immersed in the background of the game and the emotional world of the protagonist. In the ending, Tao Tsong Ni was bewitched and had no choice but to strangle Tao Tsong to death. In the end, she chased after her sister who had turned into a red butterfly and cried in despair. Xiao Yichen did not dare to imagine. If it was him, he would be living a life worse than death. After listening to the story, Yu could not calm down for a long time. This is superstition, he said. Every country has people who believe in superstitions. Xiao Yichen said, fortunately, we don't live in such a world. Actually, such a sacrifice does exist in Japanese folklore. But I think it's not only shocking, but also cruel. The boy suddenly asked, if it were you, would you be willing to complete the ritual? I don't want to, he replied angrily. I'll definitely kill whoever forces me to complete the ritual. It was rare for him to be so murderous. Just imagining such a scene infuriated him. Then, Yichen to the end, Su to the end, Each end to the world, 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 to the world. To the world, to the world, to the world. To the world, to the Su, to the world, to the world. Yu tilted his head. He thought that Xiao Yichen would say that he would rather sacrifice himself than kill him. However, Xiao Yichen replied, I'd rather kill you than live. Why? Yu was shocked. Chapter 42-34. No matter what at that time, those who are still alive are the ones who suffer the most. Xiao Yichen smiled embarrassedly. If you're dead, you won't feel any pain, right? Those who are still alive are the ones who bear the most pain. Yu was stunned. After a while he sighed and said, I didn't expect you to be so much more mature than I thought. Indeed, those who were still alive were the ones who suffered the most. At that time, there was no strong contrast between life and death. What was truly intense was pain and relief. Those who were dead were the ones who were relieved. Those who were still alive were destined to bear the burden of longing, guilt, pain, and torture. Some lives were worse than death. Why are you thinking about such heavy things? Xiao Yichen mumbled with a strange expression on his face. We're not really going to hold that kind of ceremony. Is there really telepathy between Geminis? I don't know. At least I do. When Yu heard this, he couldn't help but be curious. What exactly is telepathy like? It's like being able to feel your pain, your joy, and when you're unhappy, I'll always be the first to know. When you're happy, I'm probably happier than you are. Xiao Yichen paused for a moment and said, I didn't believe in telepathy in the past. It wasn't until this magical thing happened to me that I started to believe in it. When I was young, I often had angina for no reason. I didn't know why. I had asked so many doctors, but they couldn't find a reason. No one knew why I had angina for no reason when my body was fine. At that time, Daddy was worried that I had a heart problem and kept an eye out for information on heart disease. Actually, my heart is fine. Is it because? It's because I can feel your pain. Xiao Yichen continued. When I was studying, I knew a teacher who had a twin brother. However, his brother passed away when he was in high school. I once asked him if there was really telepathy between Geminis. He suddenly shed tears right in front of me. Why? That teacher told me about what happened in high school. At that time, he was rebellious and quarreled with his parents. His parents told him to go buy something, but he slammed the door and left. His younger brother saw that he was in a bad mood, so he tried to ask if he wanted him to buy something for him. Then he nodded and agreed. Then, you could guess the ending. Then something happened on the way there. Suddenly, he felt a strong heartache. He didn't know why, but at that time, he realized that something had happened to his brother. So, he planned to go out to look for him. Just as he was looking for the key, he received a call from his uncle. He said that his brother had been in a car accident and his condition wasn't optimistic. He cried all the way to the hospital, but only saw his brother's body. Since then, he hasn't been able to recover for many years. The bond between the twins was much stronger than ordinary familial love. This was because twins were born from the same egg. It was another part of himself, the same body of flesh and blood, the same spirit. Chapter 42-35. Therefore, regardless of whether it was Yu or Xiao Yichen, the other party was an inseparable part of their lives. Xiao Yichen couldn't help but feel emotional. Suddenly, he hugged Yu tightly inside. Don't think too much. Sleep early. Don't worry, I'll be here with you. Yu was already exhausted, but he didn't want to fall asleep. He was afraid that if he fell asleep, he would have that nightmare again. Xiao Yichen gently patted his back and sighed. Don't think too much. You can't stay awake forever. Yu, trust me. If anyone dares to hurt you, I definitely won't let them off. With his words, Yu felt an inexplicable sense of confidence. He responded with an and gently closed his eyes. When the first ray of sunlight shone through the window, Xiao Yichen opened his eyes slightly. However, he saw that the side of the bed was already empty. Yu, where did she go? Why did she wake up so early? Xiao Yichen muttered to himself. He flipped over and got out of bed. When he walked out of the room, he didn't know why, even though it was a familiar scene, the familiar furnishings gave him a strange feeling. Yu. He tried to call out, but there was no response. Mommy? Daddy? Xiao Yichen walked over and pushed open the door. The huge villa was cold and desolate. There wasn't a single trace of life in it. What's going on? Xiao Yichen became even more suspicious. Where did everyone go? He hurriedly ran to Yueyao's room. As he shouted Yueyao's name, he pushed open the door to Yueyao's room. However, he couldn't help but look at the empty bedroom. The lonely crib was still there. On the bed were the handmade wind chimes that Xianxia had specially made for Yueyao. When the morning breeze blew in, the wind chimes fluttered. However, in this dead silent room, there was a sense of desolation. Yueyao. Xiao Yichen felt an inexplicable sense of uneasiness. He didn't know why, but he had a bad premonition. Suddenly, there was the sound of hurried footsteps outside the door. Xiao Yichen caught the subtle movement and pushed the door open. As he walked out of the door, he smelled a faint smell of blood. He frowned slightly, and his heart suddenly started racing. Yu. He called out again, but he heard a sudden sound from the kitchen. Dee-dee-da-da. Dee-dee-da-da. There seemed to be the sound of water dripping on the floor. He slowly walked to the kitchen door, only to see Yu standing there alone. Yu's stiff back made him feel like a stranger for a moment. You! He had just opened his mouth when Yu's right hand suddenly loosened. Then, a fruit knife stained with blood fell to the ground. Ah! Little Yichen almost cried out in surprise. Yu turned around expressionlessly and looked at him coldly. His lips curving into an icy arc. If I can't have it, no one can have it. You! What are you doing? Xiao Yichen was instantly alerted. You're not Yu. Yu sneered and walked towards him. Sooner or later, this body will belong to me. When that time comes, Mommy will be mine. This house will be mine too. I don't want to lie in that cold world anymore. Chapter 42-36. Xiao Yichen was so shocked that he took several steps back. He clenched his fists and looked down at Xiao Yichen's wrist that was stained red with blood. Your hand! Xiao Yichen furrowed his brows tightly as a wave of anger surged in his heart. He rushed over anxiously and grabbed Xiao Yichen's collar. Gritting his teeth, he said, "This isn't your body. You don't have the right to touch it." Does your heart ache for it? Yu raised his eyebrows and looked at Xiao Yichen up and down. His gaze was cold as ice. Then what right do you have to interfere in the matters between me and him? Who says that this body doesn't belong to me? Look, I can control it as I wish. As he said this, he grabbed Xiao Yichen's wrist. I can do whatever I want. No one can interfere with me. Since I'm destined not to have it, I'd rather destroy it than leave me behind. Yu pushed Xiao Yichen away forcefully with both hands. Xiao Yichen didn't know where Xiao Yichen got his strength from, but he slammed hard against the wall and fell to the ground in a sorry state. He was about to get up when he saw a hand sticking out of the unlatched cupboard door. He widened his eyes in shock and reached out to touch it gently. He recognized the diamond ring on the ring finger of that hand. It was Xianxia's hand. Her hand came out of the cupboard weakly without a trace of life. Xiao Yichen looked at Yu in disbelief and then looked at Xianxia. He swallowed hard and opened the cupboard door, only to see Xianxia's cold body curled up in the cupboard. Ah! Little Yichen let out a yelp and sat up in bed abruptly. The action of straightening his body pulled him back to reality from the nightmare. Xiao Yichen opened his eyes and saw the world in front of him clearly. It was a familiar bedroom, familiar furnishings, and familiar windowsill. The sunlight shone in from the window and finally made his body, which was covered in cold sweat, feel a trace of warmth. However, he could no longer distinguish whether what was in front of him was a dream or a dream within a dream. Although it was a dream, the scenes in the dream were still deeply imprinted in his mind. Especially the scene in the kitchen, it tugged at his heart fiercely. How could he have such a dream? Yu. He turned around and saw that the bed was empty. He couldn't help but wonder if this was a dream or reality. Xiao Yichen held his forehead in pain. He unsteadily lifted the blanket and got out of bed. He shuffled on his slippers, opened the door, and stood at the door of the room. He was still in a daze. He finally understood how torturous a deep nightmare could be. Just by recalling the scene in the dream, he didn't dare to imagine what would have happened if he hadn't woken up. Xiao Yichen leaned against the wall in pain. He finally understood why Yu didn't want to sleep even though she was so tired last night. Nightmares were really tiring. Even though he had slept for an entire night, he still felt extremely tired. It was probably because of the dream that his brain wasn't in a state of rest. That was why he felt this way. But why would he have such a dream? It was for no reason. He had always had a good sleep and never had such a dream. Could it be? Was it because of telepathy? Chapter 42:37. Could it be? Was it because of telepathy? Could it be? Gong Fan really wanted to betray Yu Yu and invade Yu Yu's body. Did he have such a dream because of telepathy? Xiao Yichen was full of doubts. That was because the dream just now was simply too realistic. Xiao Yichen clenched his fists in anger. However, if Gong Fan really dared to hurt Yu Yu, he would never allow it to happen. Xiao Yichen walked out of the room and into the living room. He saw Yu Yu sitting on the sofa with a cold expression. At that moment, Xiao Yichen recognized that this person was not Yu Yu, but Gong Fan, who had disappeared for a long time. He could now easily tell the difference between Yu Yu and Gong Fan. Why was it him? If it were not for the dream last night, little Yichen would definitely be overjoyed by Gong Fan's appearance. However, when he thought about the dream last night, his feelings toward Gong Fan's appearance became complicated all of a sudden. Gong Fan! When Gong Fan heard this, he turned to look at Xiao Yichen. However, there wasn't much emotion in his eyes. "You're awake?" Little Yichen hummed in response uncomfortably. He sat down next to his older brother, but he was wary of keeping a distance from him. "Why are you up so early?" When Gong Fan heard this, he took a sip of milk and said calmly, "I wanted to get some sun." Perhaps it was because he had been asleep for too long that Gong Fan didn't want to waste time sleeping. Hence, he got up early in the morning. In the living room, sunlight shone in and landed on his body. It was as if he was covered in a layer of gold. Xiao Yichen's eyes met his briefly. While he was in a daze, he suddenly heard the sound of water splashing from the kitchen. For some reason, Xiao Yichen thought of the dream. He stood up nervously and hurried to the kitchen. "Mommy!" He rushed to the kitchen door and saw Xianxia preparing breakfast in front of the kitchen counter. She jumped in fright when she heard Xiao Yichen's voice. She turned around to look at the door, only to see Xiao Yichen heave a sigh of relief when he saw that she was only washing the cups. He was scared to death. What happened? Xianxia was a little nervous, thinking that something had happened. What's wrong?" "Oh, no, nothing." Xiao Yichen walked to Xianxia's side and whispered, "It's Gong Fan." Ugh, ugh. Xianxia also knew that the person who woke up today was Gong Fan. However, there wasn't much surprise on her face. Instead, there was a faint worry. She was obviously worried about Yu Yu. Last night, she saw with her own eyes how Yu Yu struggled to wake up from his dream. He told her tiredly that in his dream, Gong Fan held a knife and stabbed his heart. Even though she had comforted him back then by saying that it was just a dream, no one dared to say whether it was a dream or if Gong Fan's personality had entered his dream and created such a terrifying nightmare. Now, early in the morning, she found out that Yu Yu didn't wake up. The person who woke up was Gong Fan. This made her feel strangely uneasy. There was an invisible pressure between Yu Yu and Gong Fan that was weighing on her heart. Chapter 42:38. "Mommy, yesterday Xiao Yichen pondered for a long time. He did not know how to tell Xianxia what had happened in his dream. Firstly, he was afraid that she would be worried. Secondly, he was afraid that such an unrealistic dream would give her a psychological hint. He suspected that everything in the dream must have something to do with Gong Fan. Could it be that Gong Fan really wanted to invade Yu Yu's body? Was that why he had this dream? He had this dream because he had a telepathic connection with Yu Yu. That was why he had this dream. Xiao Yichen was very worried. But would Gong Fan really do that? In order to invade Yu Yu's body, he did not hesitate to hurt Yu Yu. Whether it was him or Xianxia, they all welcomed and accepted him. The family got along very well. Even Yu Yu was very tolerant of Gong Fan. How could he hurt Yu Yu? Xiao Yichen could not believe it. At the dining table, Xianxia served breakfast on the table. Xiao Yichen and Gong Fan sat opposite each other at the dining table. Xiao Yichen looked at Gong Fan as he ate his breakfast. He was hesitant. He had a lot of questions to ask Gong Fan, but he was worried that Gong Fan would be as cruel and vicious as he had been in the dream. If he asked this question, he would alert the enemy. Xiao Yichen was surprised to find that ever since he woke up from this dream, he seemed to be more cautious of Gong Fan. He seemed to be on guard against him. This was a subconscious precaution. It was not intentional at all. Gong Fan took a bite of his bread. When he saw that Xiao Yichen seemed to have a lot on his mind, he raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong?" Oh, nothing." Xiao Yichen shook his head and picked up 2 slices of bread. He smeared a layer of blueberry jam on it and put it into his mouth absent-mindedly. "You don't seem to have slept well." Gong Fan's casual words made Xiao Yichen's heart skip a beat. "No, I know. But I feel that you're not in good spirits." It was not deliberate concern. Although Gong Fan's tone was not that warm, one could tell that he cared. He noticed that Xiao Yichen looked a little pale. He had a feeling that Xiao Yichen did not have a good rest today. He looked a little tired, and his complexion was a little worse. Little Yichen touched his cheek and gave a perfunctory reply. "Maybe it's because I had a nightmare." Nightmare? However, Gong Fan did not think so. Xiao Yichen was so carefree. What nightmares could he have? Turning into a box upon landing? Xiao Yichen replied. "I haven't played PUBG recently. I remember that you were addicted to this game. For a period of time, you would eat chicken during the day, chicken at night, and even in your dreams." Gong Fan paused, took a sip of milk and teased. "Did you dream that you were being chased by someone with a frying pan?" Ahem. Gong Fan was actually in the mood to joke with him. Xiao Yichen felt a little more relaxed. He thought that a dream was just a dream. There was no need for him to take it too seriously. It was just a dream, but it had extended to other aspects. Yu was his younger brother. Similarly, Gong Fan was also his younger brother. How could he not trust Gong Fan and suspect that he wanted to hurt Yu? It was just a dream. Xiao Yichen deliberately ignored everything that happened in the dream. Chapter 42-39. Xiao Yichen was distracted, and Gong Fan was obviously in a daze as well. He kept using the knife and fork to rub the egg yolk on the plate, as if he was thinking about something. Xianxia couldn't help but worry when she saw him in a daze. "What are you thinking about?" Gong Fan only snapped back to his senses after a while. He looked up at her and replied, "Oh, I feel a little unfamiliar. I feel like I've been asleep for a long time." Xiao Yichen smiled and said, "You're right. You've been asleep for a long time." Gong Fan frowned. Xianxia asked tentatively, "Do you remember where you were before you fell asleep?" Gong Fan recalled for a moment and looked up. "In Mommy's arms?" "You still remember?" "Yeah, I remember that you promised someone to make a dessert table. In the end, I was muddle-headed that day and suddenly fainted." "Do you feel that something's wrong? Why did you suddenly faint for no reason?" Xianxia asked deliberately, trying to get some clues from Gong Fan. Gong Fan listened and tried to recall his memories. However, no matter how he tried, he was indeed missing a part of his memory from that day. "I can't remember clearly." "I see." Xianxia couldn't hide the disappointment in her eyes, but she hid it very well. Gong Fan obviously noticed the disappointment in her eyes and asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Did something happen that day?" "Nothing." Xianxia sat down and smiled. "Let's eat. Let's finish eating early and go for a walk outside, okay?" "Okay." Gong Fan's expression instantly relaxed. He enjoyed the time he spent with Xianxia the most, and he felt that the whole world was peaceful and blissful. Xiao Yichen still looked troubled. He had an exhausting nightmare last night, and even after waking up for a long time, he still couldn't get over it. In the backyard, Hua Jin stood by the swing and quietly looked at Natalia, who was sitting on the swing and playing by herself. Time was quiet and leisurely. "Can't you push me?" Natalia suddenly asked him for help. Hua Jin smiled and asked half-jokingly, "Why?" "I wanted to push you, but you said you wanted to do it yourself." "I want to swing higher, but after swinging for a long time, I can't get any higher." Hua Jin helplessly circled behind her and gave her a gentle push. "How about this height? If it's too high, what if we fly out?" Natalia shook her head like a rattle drum. No, I want to go higher." "Don't worry. I'll hold on tight." When Hua Jin heard this, he was also helpless, so he repeatedly reminded him, "You must hold on tight, otherwise, you will definitely fall and become stupid." "Yes." Natalia nodded and held the rope. Hua Jin gave it a little push, and the swing swung high. Wah! Natalia squinted her eyes and smiled excitedly. After the swing swung high, it gradually slowed down. After experiencing the excitement, Natalia settled down and sat on the swing, allowing the gentle breeze to caress her face. "When is Daddy coming back?" She abruptly blurted out this sentence. When Hua Jin heard this, he was stunned. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Why? Do you miss Daddy?" "Yeah." Chapter 42-40. "Didn't you just video call him a few days ago?" Hua Jin said again, "Daddy is so busy he might not have time to come back." "Why don't you call him and ask when he will come back?" Natalia's eyes were wide open, and she looked expectant. Hua Jin didn't want to disappoint her, so he walked to the side and took out his phone. He looked at Gong Jie's FaceTime, hesitated for a moment, and finally dialed. Hurricane Group. Gong Jie put on a windbreaker and walked into the maintenance hall. He looked at the huge monster parked on the tarmac. An armed helicopter. This was his personal vehicle. Armed helicopters were equipped with weapons and developed for the purpose of carrying out combat missions. They were divided into ordinary armed helicopters, stealth helicopters, and high-speed armed helicopters. Armed helicopters could be divided into two major categories: special purpose and multi-purpose. The special purpose type had a narrow fuselage and stronger combat capability. The multi-purpose type could be used to carry out attack missions, as well as transport, landing, and other missions. Modern armed helicopters not only carried a variety of weapons, but also carried a large amount of ammunition. In terms of single aircraft, helicopters with a higher takeoff weight could carry more ammunition. For example, the Mi-24 armed helicopter used in the Eaton P-2H war and the AFH war. The nose is equipped with one 4-barreled machine gun, 1,500 rounds of ammunition, 4 anti-tank missiles can be hung on the short wingtips, and 4 hangars can be hung under the short wing 4 57mm rocket launchers with a total of 128 rockets. If rockets weren't installed, 1,500 kilograms of bombs could be installed. Another example was the AHL armed helicopter used in the Vietnam battlefield. It was equipped with a 20mm cannon or 30mm cannon in the nose. 8 anti-tank missiles or 76 70mm rockets could be installed under the short wings of the fuselage. The A-129 helicopter with a takeoff weight of less than 4 was equipped with an organic gun. It could carry 8 Hort missiles or 52 70mm rockets. The air combat type could carry 8 Mistral air-to-air missiles. For an organized armed helicopter unit, its firepower couldn't be underestimated. At this moment, this huge armed monster was undergoing daily maintenance. Men were creatures with a strong desire to conquer. Therefore they liked cars, tanks and guns. Not everyone could own such a huge armed monster. This military helicopter was a gift from Gong Xiaoying when he came of age. So far it had been in service for 10 years. If the results of this maintenance were not good, he would probably have to retire. Gong Jie could not bear to part with her. After 10 years, it was impossible to say that he had no feelings for this comrade. This was the most precious gift he had received when he was 18 years old. For so many years, he had treated it like a treasure. However, now that he was about to retire, he could only lament that time had passed too quickly. This big monster was the AH-1 Cobra armed helicopter. After the end of the Vietnam War in 1990, the United States Marine Corps decided to use the AH-1W Super Cobra as a base to upgrade their armed helicopters in all aspects, and the result was the AH-1Z Viper. The first prototype of the AH-1Z was successfully tested in 2000. Nominally, this was an improvement in the Super Cobra's performance. Within its lifespan, just the cost of maintenance and training alone would be hundreds of millions of USD, or even more than 1 billion USD. Chapter 42-41. Hurricane was especially strict when it came to the maintenance of equipment. Gong Jie walked up to the helicopter and gently stroked it with his hand. He gave it a name, Robin. He gave it this name because Gong Jie used to have an idol when he was young. His favorite was Batman, the main character of Marvel's comics. When he was young, he liked to collect Batman memorabilia. And Robin was Batman's partner and assistant. He was also known as Boy Wonder, and together with Batman, they were known as the energetic duo. When he was young, he also hoped to have a close friend and assistant like Robin. until Gong Xiaoying gave him this military helicopter. For some reason, the first name that came to his mind was Robin. That day, he sat in the brand new pilot seat for the first time. Touching the controls, he felt as though the AH-1Z had been given life. Your name is Robin. What do you think? He actually gave this big guy a name just like that, talking to himself. For 10 years, Robin had carried him through the skies. It had also flown over the aurora and the horizon. In the rain of bullets, it had been his most loyal partner. It had helped him shoot down missiles that tried to sneak up on him. Its hard shell had helped him block countless bullets from machine guns. It had also been on the brink of death and had gone through life and death together. Young Master Jie. He walked over during the maintenance, holding a thick stack of test reports in his hands. Gong Jie walked over and asked anxiously, "How is it?" "The test reports are out. Robin has met all the requirements and can continue to serve in the military." Upon hearing this, Gong Jie's eyes lit up. He turned around and jumped onto the big guy happily. It was just like when he had just become an adult and saw it for the first time like a child. Robin, that's great. He thought that Robin couldn't continue to serve in the military. He didn't expect that Robin could continue to accompany him by his side. Just then, his cell phone suddenly rang. Gong Jie answered the call. Soon, Hua Jin's face appeared clearly on the screen. At the same time, Hua Jin also saw Gong Jie's face on the screen. For some reason, Hua Jin saw a smile on Gong Jie's face. It was rare for him to see him smiling so happily. Usually, he had a cold face and an indifferent expression on his face. It was rare to see him smile so innocently like a child. Upon seeing Hua Jin, the smile on Gong Jie's face disappeared and he cleared his throat awkwardly. What? What's the matter? Hua Jin was speechless. Could it be that his face dampened her mood? For some reason, Hua Jin was a little. Are you free? Gong Jie thought about it for a while. He did not seem to have much free time recently. His schedule was packed. What's wrong? What's the matter? Natalia misses you. He kept asking me. When are you coming back? Give her the phone. Okay. Hua Jin passed the cell phone to Natalia. Natalia held the cell phone and saw Gong Jie's face. She immediately smiled. Daddy, are you busy? She looked at him eagerly. Although she was smiling, the anticipation in her eyes made Gong Jie unable to say that he was busy. Daddy, do you miss me? Natalia asked again. Gong Jie raised his eyebrows and leaned closer to the screen. What do you think? Chapter 42-42. How do you know that I don't miss you? If you miss me, you will definitely rush back to see me. Natalia pouted, looking aggrieved. When Gong Jie heard this, he couldn't bear to see her like this. He ran his fingers lightly across the screen as if he wanted to touch her face. Daddy will go back to spend some time with you, okay? Natalia was still not satisfied with this answer. She asked, when will you be back? In a few days. Then, in a few days. Gong Jie frowned slightly. He didn't know what to do next, so he couldn't give her an answer immediately. However, if he gave her a half-hearted answer and didn't call her back after agreeing on a time, Natalia would be very disappointed in him and think that he didn't keep his word. Therefore, he had to be very careful when answering this question. Thus, Gong Jie replied, Daddy will call you back tomorrow, okay? Daddy will arrange some work and go back to see you when I have time. If Daddy is really busy, you don't have to come back to see me. Natalia was a little embarrassed. She could tell that Gong Jie was really busy. Although she missed him, she couldn't force him. Natalia was very sensible, well-behaved, and considerate. She didn't like to force people. Seeing this, Gong Jie's heart softened even more. Good girl. I promised to make time to go back to see you, so I will definitely do it. However, I don't know what to do next. Why don't you pass the phone to Uncle? I will tell him something. Okay. Natalia reluctantly passed the phone to Hua Jin. Hua Jin took the phone and walked to the side. Before Gong Jie could speak, he lowered his voice and said to him, Did Alice tell you? What did she say? It's about Natalia. Natalia? During this time, Alice hadn't contacted him. Who was Natalia? Noticing the confusion in his eyes, Hua Jin realized that Gong Jie probably didn't know about this. Alice suspects that Natalia's personality has already appeared. However, Alice said that Natalia's personality is very dangerous. She even knows how to hypnotize people. Therefore, Natalia is in danger. Danger! I might as well say that she is a dangerous person to us. She is like a ticking time bomb. We don't know when she will explode, but we don't know if she will explode. Gong Jie frowned and said immediately, Alice didn't mention this to me. I think she is too suspicious. Hua Jin paused for a moment and said, I've been under a lot of pressure recently. It's not that I'm scared, but I'm worried that I won't be able to take good care of Natalia. After all, I have no experience in taking care of patients, and my reaction is always half a beat slower. Don't worry, there's no need to be so stressed. Just pay more attention to her condition. I believe that with Alice around, the situation won't get out of control. I will arrange my work as soon as possible and try to return to China as soon as possible. Because Alice was by Natalia's side, Gong Jie wasn't very worried at first. However, when he heard Hua Jin's words, he realized that things might not be so simple. Chapter 42-43. Hua Jin nodded. For some reason, when Gong Jie promised that he would arrange it as soon as possible and return to see Natalia, Hua Jin felt inexplicably relieved. The name Gong Jie seemed to signify an absolute sense of security and reliability. Hua Jin put away his phone and walked in front of Natalia. Under her expectant gaze, he smiled and said, Daddy will arrange for work as soon as possible and return to accompany you, Are you happy? Natalia was so happy that she stepped on the waves. Uncle Hua Jin. I feel so lucky to have met Daddy and you. Natalia didn't know why, but she felt extremely emotional. She suddenly jumped off the swing, ran in front of him, and gave him a big hug. I love you. Perhaps it was because she grew up in the West, but Natalia knew how to express love. Hua Jin was stunned. He didn't expect Natalia to give him such a warm hug. It seemed to be the first time she hugged him so actively. He was overjoyed. He also squatted down and hugged her tightly. I love you too. Yeah. Natalia blinked and suddenly thought of something. She lowered her voice and asked softly, Then if I make a mistake, will you and Daddy not want me anymore? How can that be? Hua Jin didn't think much of it. Who doesn't make mistakes? No one is a saint and will never make mistakes. How can we abandon you just because you make a mistake? Natalia's eyes couldn't help but turn red when she heard that. Hua Jin suddenly realized why she asked that. She had lived in an environment with too many uncertain factors since she was young. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that she was homeless. Strictly speaking, Natalia didn't have any real family. At first, when Gong Jie said that he wanted to adopt her, she didn't think much of it. She had a feeling that this family wouldn't last for long. She didn't have much confidence in the concept of home and happiness. Therefore, she felt uneasy and cautious. She even deliberately distanced herself from him because she was afraid that once she put her feelings into it, she would be sad once they were separated. Then it's a promise. Natalia carefully extended her pinky. Her eyes sparkled as she moved closer to Hua Jin and pouted. Pinky promise. From now on, we're a family. No matter what, let's never be separated, okay? After spending so much time together, Natalia realized how warm it was to have a family, even though they had been living together peacefully. It was this long-lasting warmth that made Natalia even more dependent on Hua Jin. The more he felt warmth, the more he felt that this warmth was precious and the more he wanted to cherish it. Especially today, after the phone call with Gong Jie and learning of her needs, he immediately arranged for work and flew back to accompany her. It made her feel like she was being treasured. Therefore, she also wanted to cherish it and open her heart to let Hua Jin and Gong Jie live in her heart. Hua Jin reached out his pinky and gently hooked it with hers. His lips curled into a smile, revealing his pearly white teeth. I promise you. Natalia looked at him and smiled. Chapter 42-44. She was grateful to Hua Jin and Gong Jie for giving her such a family, even though such a family seemed to be different from other children's families. Everyone else had a mother and a father. It was a pity that her family didn't seem to be such a combination. Natalia leaned into his embrace and suddenly asked curiously, If I call him Daddy, what should I call you? Uncle. Hua Jin raised his eyebrows. Isn't that what you've always called me? But I want a mommy too. As Natalia said that, she suddenly smiled mischievously. She sized up Hua Jin and said sweetly, How about I call you Mommy? No. Hua Jin said awkwardly. I'm a man. How can I call a man mommy? That's how you address a woman. But you're prettier than most women. Natalia blinked, but her expression was sincere. Hua Jin was speechless. That. He couldn't deny it. He was indeed prettier than most women. But that's not a reason for you to call me mommy. Haha. Natalia didn't care. She kept calling him mommy. Hua Jin corrected her, but it didn't work. Finally, under Natalia's coaxing and pestering, he nodded. You're not allowed to call me that outside. Then what should I call you? Hua Jin was also confused. That's right. Hua Jin suddenly said, how about you call me Daddy too? After a pause, he felt a little guilty. Are you willing to call me that? I'm willing. But, what if you're both here? Natalia didn't say it clearly, but Hua Jin understood what she meant. She meant that if Hua Jin and Gong Jie were both present, wouldn't it be easy to confuse them if they both called him Daddy? How about this, Natalia said. I'll call Gong Jie Daddy Jie, and you Daddy Jin. Pfft. Hua Jin suddenly laughed. It sounded as if he and Gong Jie were a couple. It felt weird. In foreign countries, many gays and lesbians formed marriage families, and their adopted children were called that. If outsiders heard it, they would misunderstand that he and Gong Jie were a couple. Daddy Jin. Daddy Jin. It sounds nice when you call me that. After spending so much time together, she was no longer as cold and distant as she was when they had first met. This question stumped Natalia. She mumbled, I like both of them. Hua Jin asked again, if he and I both fell into the sea, who would you save first? Natalia furrowed her brows. I don't know how to swim. If I save you, I'll die too. Ha ha ha. Hua Jin was amused by her serious answer. What I mean is, if you know how to swim, then I'll definitely save you first. Why? Because Daddy Jie knows how to swim. Natalia looked troubled. Chapter 42-45. I'll tell you a secret, okay? Natalia said seriously. What secret? Actually, I have an older sister. Natalia hesitated for a long time before deciding to tell him the secret. Hua Jin's expression changed instantly. Shoo, this is a secret. Don't tell anyone else, or else my sister will be angry. What's your sister's name? Natalia, Natalia said. Actually, it feels weird to say that she's my sister because other than me, no one else has seen her. I feel that she's more like another me. You can see her? Probably. Probably? Hua Jin was a little confused by her tone. Why did she sound so uncertain? So, can I see her or not? Does it count if I see her in my dreams? In your dreams? I feel that she can control my body. Do you know about the crystal ball? Hua Jin vaguely sensed that he might be able to find some clues about Natalia from Natalia's mouth. Hence, he listened to her attentively. That crystal ball was a gift from my sister Natalia. Gift? Natalia nestled in his arms and recalled. Actually, the first time I saw her was a long time ago. At that time, I couldn't sleep well. I would have many dreams, very strange dreams. Many times, I couldn't even tell which was reality and which was a dream. So, she gave me that crystal ball and said that as long as I hugged it to sleep at night, I would be able to sleep well. At least, I wouldn't have those strange dreams anymore. Crystal ball? Could it be? Natalia had hinted to Natalia that hugging the crystal ball would allow her to sleep well. Was she actually using the crystal ball to control Natalia? Natalia might have been controlled by Natalia because of the crystal ball? This seemed to be a very important clue. I see. Hua Jin probed. Do you have to hug the crystal ball to sleep every night? Yes, sometimes I forget, but if I do, I'll have a lot of strange dreams at night. However, if I hold the crystal ball, sometimes I feel like I have slept for several days, and I feel very tired when I wake up. I see. Actually, I'm very curious. Natalia frowned and turned to look at Hua Jin. Pursing her lips, she hesitated for a long time before finally asking the question that had been bothering her for a long time. None of you can see Natalia, can you? Hua Jin didn't say anything. He just shook his head subconsciously. I feel that Natalia is very bad. Very bad. Yes, she told me not to trust anyone, including you and Daddy. So, in the beginning I was always wary of you, but slowly, I found that you were very good to me, very gentle, just like family. I wanted to get close to you, but every time I wanted to get close to you, she would stop me. How strange. She always seems to be able to see through my heart. Then why do you think she's bad? Because. Chapter 42-46. Natalia is like a demon living in my heart. For some reason, this sentence sent a chill down Hua Jin's spine. Did she really say that? In the study, Alice was playing with a fountain pen. Hua Jin sat across from her, deep in thought. Outside the window, it was already late at night. Natalia had already fallen asleep. When Alice returned home, Hua Jin told her everything, no matter how big or small, about what had happened. Alice was surprised to hear it. Wait a minute. My mind is a bit messed up. Alice frowned. She decided to connect the clues and reorganize her thoughts. Hua Jin sat quietly on the side. He did not say anything, afraid that he would interrupt her thoughts. Can I understand it this way? Alice said seriously. Natalia controlled Natalia through the crystal ball. She could even decide when she could control this body and when she could let Natalia control this body. I think so too. But, then, what is Natalia's purpose? Alice could not figure it out when Hua Jin mentioned it. She had been thinking about Natalia's purpose and motive, but she could not figure it out. Hua Jin opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but he did not dare to do so. Alice obviously sensed that he had something to say, so she encouraged him. What do you think? I think my idea might be a bit ridiculous. I'm afraid that you will laugh at me if I say it out loud. Even if it's authoritative science, there are many ridiculous possibilities. In real life there are too many ridiculous things. Why don't you tell me about it? Maybe it's an important idea. Don't you think that it's suspicious that Professor Romanka allowed us to adopt Natalia so easily? Alice was suddenly stunned when she heard that. A white light flashed across her mind. What do you mean? Since Professor Romanka created Natalia, does he have the ability to control this personality? Perhaps, in terms of relationship, Natalia regards him as her father, or perhaps, as her master? Alice frowned and her eyes suddenly flashed with a sharp light. That's the main point. Then, since there is such a possibility, can Natalia's motive be considered as Romanka's, that he was the one who ordered Natalia to do all this? It's not impossible. Alice rubbed her temples. Hua Jin's words had undoubtedly opened up her mind. Then, encouraged, Hua Jin finally voiced his doubts bravely. What's Professor Romanka's motive for creating Natarisa? You should know better than I do. Before this, I've looked into his academic research and spent some effort, but I also learned that Professor Romanka has always wanted to create a personality society to achieve the goal of controlling people with multiple personalities. Alice pondered for a moment and suddenly said, Professor Romanka's so-called personality society is to create a personality to take on the role of the Reaper. Reaper? Alice said in a low voice. Yes. This Reaper has the status of a leader recognized by all the personalities, and has enough authority to control the life and death of all the personalities. Chapter 42-47. How is that possible? Hua Jin, on the other hand, was in disbelief. Don't tell me that even the main personality of a Reaper can be completely controlled? It's not to the extent of being controlled. However, it's hard to completely rule out this possibility. That's equivalent to not saying anything. Hua Jin said again, it's like a doctor telling a cancer patient, there's a chance of curing the disease, but it doesn't rule out the possibility of not being able to survive. I've already said that even the most authoritative science doesn't have absolute conclusions. In fact, there are still many things in this world that humans haven't explored and understood. The so-called science itself is a known and verified answer. Alice emphasized and said, however, what we've learned from Professor Romanka's conclusion is that the Reaper's ruling power is very terrifying. Hua Jin suddenly became a little worried. It can't be that the main personality can be killed, right? After a pause, Hua Jin said again, I remember someone said before that the position of the main personality is absolutely not allowed to be challenged. The main personality won't be controlled, let alone killed. Yes, that's it. Alice frowned and suddenly said, but that's only in theory. For example, after many experiments, through electric shocks, and even through many similar experiments, there's a possibility that the other personalities will disappear. There's a more mysterious saying that these personalities are all driven to the land of exile. However, the world of dual personality and multiple personality is very complicated. After all, this kind of symptom is not like a fracture that can be determined through X-rays. It's very difficult for the outside world to find out what the world of these patients is like. You can't enter their mental world, so you can't find out what kind of earth-shaking changes are happening in their bodies. Then, you mean, Professor Romanka and I came up with the idea that the sanctioner couldn't kill the first personality, but in the illusion, the first personality was killed by the sanctioner in the dream. What if the sanctioner knew that he was already dead? The death of self-awareness is like a person in a vegetative state. He thinks he's awake, but he's actually still alive. He's just in a deep sleep, but he doesn't have the consciousness to wake up. Perhaps such a deep sleep is not far from death. Hua Jin was confused, but he finally understood what she meant. It was nothing more than, for example, if the Reaper split from Natalia's body, then in the dream or in the illusion, the Reaper killed the first personality. Then, if the first personality thinks that he's dead and doesn't realize that he's only dead in the dream, then an endless deep sleep is no different from death. Do you know? Alice said seriously, if Gongfan doesn't take the initiative to release Yu in his consciousness, perhaps, Yu would still be trapped in the endless seal. Hua Jin could not help sucking in a breath of cold air. Chapter 42-48. Then let me ask you a question. Hua Jin asked seriously, can both Yu and Gongfan's personalities be preserved at the same time? Alice was stunned when she heard this. Why do you ask? You said that with Yu's current body, bearing two personalities is a huge burden. His mental strength can't support it at all. However, whether it's Xianxia, Xiaoyi Chen, or even Yue Yao, they all have feelings for Gongfan. Under such circumstances, if Gongfan's personality is erased, it won't be a good ending for anyone. Alice frowned helplessly. This is indeed a tricky matter. However, I've already contacted other experts in this field some time ago. When the time comes, we'll discuss it together. After all, I'm alone. With my ability, there might be many limitations. However, if everyone thinks of a way together, we won't be completely helpless. Okay. Hua Jin stood up and said to Alice, I'll go check on Natalia and see if she's asleep. Okay. Hua Jin went to Natalia's room. At that moment, the wall lamp in the room was still switched off. Natalia was very afraid of the dark. Sometimes, when she couldn't fall asleep, she would sleep with the lights on. Usually, Hua Jin would come to her room to check on her before going to bed. If the lights were still on, he would turn them off. Gradually, Hua Jin realized that she didn't like to turn off the lights. Every day before going to bed, he would come to check on her. This had also become his habit. As he walked into the room, he was surrounded by warmth. Hua Jin walked to the bed and sat by it for a while. He didn't know why, but when he looked down at Natalia's sleeping face, he unconsciously fell into a trance. Natalia slept very quietly. Her eyes were closed, and her eyelashes were long, thick, and slightly curled. Her fair skin was crystal clear, as if it could be broken by the slightest breeze. Before this, he didn't even think that he would like children so much. He couldn't even imagine what it would be like to get married and have a family. Before this, he didn't even like children very much. He always felt that children were noisy. If he didn't teach them well and raised a naughty child, it would be even more of a headache. Nowadays, there were too many naughty children. Some of them were brought up because their parents didn't discipline them well, while others were brought up because their parents didn't have the time. Hua Jin had been having a headache. This was because he had never had a good family since he was a child. He had been through a lot of hardships growing up, and it was not easy for him to become sensible. He was really worried that he would not be able to give his future children a happy family. This was because he did not have a happy family since he was young. Thus, he did not know what a healthy family was like. Due to an accident, he suddenly became a surrogate father and had a child. In the beginning, he had been caught off guard, but he had gradually gotten used to it. After that, he had completely treated Natalia as his own child, as if she was his own. It was also for this reason that he gradually understood Yun Xiaoxia's feelings. Perhaps, when they grew up and became parents, they would understand their parents' good intentions. Because of this, he hated his father and mother even more. However, that was the grudges of the previous generation. He didn't want to understand, nor did he want to participate. He only wanted to give Natalia a warm family as much as possible. That was all. Chapter 42-49. He only hoped that Natalia could grow up peacefully like other children and have a normal family. Hua Jin gently reached out and carefully touched her skin. When his fingertips touched her face, he accidentally brushed past her eyelashes. Even though she was asleep, the itchy mark made Natalia shiver. He quickly retracted his hand, afraid that he would wake her up. After making sure that she was fast asleep again, he smiled, lowered his head, and gently pecked her on the forehead. Then, he got up, turned off the lights, and quietly walked out. On the bed, Natalia felt as if she was dreaming and felt the warm goodnight kiss. She couldn't help but curl her lips into a half-smile. At night, Gong Fan lay in bed and couldn't fall asleep for a long time. He didn't know why, but he was a little anxious. He looked at the time and saw that it was already very late. He was also very tired, but he didn't dare to sleep. He was afraid that if he fell asleep, he wouldn't be able to wake up again. His anxiety made him even less sleepy. Thus, after a few rounds of tossing and turning, he felt much more refreshed. He sat up a little and leaned against the bed. He turned to look at Xianxia and saw that he was already breathing evenly. It was obvious that he was dreaming. Gong Fan let out a soft sigh and got out of bed. He shuffled his slippers and put on a jacket. When he passed by the study table, he saw Xianxia's earphones and iPod on the table and picked them up. He put on the earphones, walked to the balcony, and turned on the music. The music was paused halfway, so when he pressed the play button, the music started to play. Looking back, you haven't gone far. Yi's gaze will never change. Gong Fan was stunned. He didn't expect Xianxia to listen to such sad music. The music was all right, but the singing was sad and the lyrics were sad. It couldn't help but stir up one's emotions. Gong Fan walked to the swing and sat up gently. He casually kicked it, and the swing started to sway slowly. The night breeze was gentle, and it was a little cold. He straightened his clothes and looked up at the moon in the sky. Indistinctly, he heard a suppressed sobbing sound. Gong Fan was shocked and shouted. He followed the sobbing sound and groped his way over. His footsteps were very light, so even when he walked to the other balcony, the sobbing did not stop because he was discovered. What should I do? Am I being too selfish? When Gong Fan heard Xianxia's choked voice, his heart skipped a beat. He stood rooted to the ground, not daring to move. The balcony of the master bedroom was separated by a wall. On the balcony, Xianxia leaned against the railing. She lowered her head and held her forehead in frustration. Wuxia comforted her tenderly. Don't think too much. If Yu sees you like this, she will feel even worse. What should I do? Xianxia sobbed and said sadly, I can't bear to part with Gong Fan. My heart aches for this child. He has been carrying so much on his shoulders since he was young. Yu must have noticed my reluctance and heartache for Gong Fan, so he shouldered everything by himself. And I can't do anything to help. Because of my selfishness, even though he is in so much pain, he can't bear to make a choice. He is worried that if he loses Gong Fan, I will be sad. Chapter 42-50. She knew that she was the one who couldn't bear to part with Gong Fan. Yu could tell that she couldn't bear to part with him. That was why she had held on for so long. But now, she could tell that Yu's mental state was getting worse. Nightmares were endless. Nightmares destroyed one's willpower. Yu insisted that he was fine. She didn't even say a word of comfort. This wasn't something she wanted to see. She had imagined such a situation countless times. Yu and Gong Fan. She had to choose between them. But every time she thought of making a choice, she didn't dare to think about it anymore. It was this hesitation and indecisiveness that made Yu bear so much silently. There's no point in thinking so much now. I'm just thinking that whether it's Gong Fan or Yu, they are both our sons and we can't do without either of them. Maybe we don't have this condition now, but maybe in the future, in the near future, we will have this condition and you won't be in such a difficult position. When Xianxia heard this, she couldn't bear it anymore. Even if the body can bear it, the mind will never be able to bear it, right? If it were you, would you be willing to share a body with the other personality? Wuxia didn't say anything. Of course he wasn't willing. It wasn't because he was selfish. It was because both personalities would suffer because of this. No one wanted to fall asleep tonight, only to wake up half a month later. Even if it was the same person, Two personalities would never be able to fit together 100%. No matter how advanced the medical technology is, there's no way to save you and Gong Fan, unless Gong Fan exists in another body. After a pause, Xianxia calmed down a little. She gripped the railing tightly and said sadly, I don't want you to interfere with his decision because of me. You mean? Xianxia was silent for a long time. With tears in her eyes, she looked up at the hazy moon in the sky, but when she thought of the decision she had to make next, she closed her eyes sadly and cried. Yu is an independent person. He should have his own thoughts and shouldn't be unable to make a decision because of my concerns. So, she choked on her sobs for a long time. The broken words in her mouth could not be strung together into a coherent sentence. It was obvious how much pain she was in. Her back was stiff like a rock. If I really have to make a decision. Xianxia took a deep breath and said with difficulty, For you, I also want to give up Gong Fan. Even though the words were suppressed, they still reached Gong Fan's ears very clearly. He leaned against the wall and opened his eyes weakly. After a long while, he finally came to his senses and his eyes turned red. For you, I have to give up on Gong Fan. It was just a few words, but they were sharper than the tip of a knife. They pierced his heart mercilessly. Gong Fan pursed his lips tightly and didn't say a word. He stood silently in the shadows and hid himself. It was only when Mu Yaja comforted Xianxia and helped her back to the room that he finally found his breath. He finally took a step forward, but he almost stumbled and fell to the ground. Chapter 42:51. He sat on the bed in a daze. At that moment, Xianxia was still sleeping soundly on the bed. He looked at Xianxia with sincere envy. He envied Xianxia for having a peaceful world. He didn't have to worry about not being able to appear again. He also didn't have to feel guilty, sad, or disappointed about being abandoned. Yes. Xianxia's words were obvious enough. For Yu, she was willing to give him up. In other words, if there was a medical method that could save Yu, she was willing to give him up. Between Yu and his Libra, she chose Yu. But what was wrong with that? After all, her feelings for Yu were not something he could compare to. But it was unfair. It was unfair. In fact, he had appeared a long time ago in this body. It was just that. Gong Fan felt indignant, but helpless. Even so, even if he knew it was unfair, what could he fight for? He couldn't win. Gong Fan suddenly felt very sad. The thing that he had been afraid of had finally happened. He had always felt uneasy and insecure. Even if Xianxia tried her best to give him a sense of security, he still didn't feel safe. Now that he heard Xianxia's decision with his own ears, Gong Fan's entire world collapsed. He lay down on the bed and looked at the ceiling in a daze. His tears gradually stopped, but that kind of sadness was not something that tears could express. His heart was full of tears, but they couldn't flow anymore. The next day, Xianxia realized that Gong Fan was depressed. He sat alone in a corner and ignored everyone who called him. It was just like when Gong Fan returned to the Mu family. He was cold and distant. No matter how patiently Xianxia talked to him, he either turned around and walked away or pretended not to hear her. Xianxia didn't know what had happened to make Gong Fan treat her so coldly. Xianxia was also very surprised. Why did Gong Fan's attitude toward his family suddenly become so cold? For the next few days, Gong Fan was like this. Xianxia could not hold it in any longer. He pulled Gong Fan into the room, and his cheeky smile was replaced by a serious expression. What's wrong with you recently? Gong Fan broke free from his restraints and glanced at him coldly. There was no emotion in his eyes. Since she had already given up on him, she might as well be cold to the end. If he treated them so coldly, they would also be disappointed in him and treat him coldly. In this way, if the day of separation really came, no matter who it was, they wouldn't be reluctant to leave and wouldn't feel sad. That was what he thought. However, his aloof attitude had undoubtedly infuriated little Chen. Why aren't you talking? He was a little annoyed. Didn't you say that no matter what happened, you would never make mommy angry or sad? But look at what you've been doing these past few days. No matter how much mommy and I talk to you, you ignore us. Do you know that mommy's imagination will run wild and she will be very sad? This series of aggressive questioning made Gong Fan even angrier. He raised his eyes to look deeply at little Chen and let out a sneer. Chapter 42:52. He was filled with anger, but he couldn't find a way to vent it. At this point, he still didn't want to make things clear. He didn't even want to vent his anger on Xianxia, so he forcefully restrained himself. Gong Fan took a deep breath and turned to leave the room. When Xianxia saw this, how could he allow him to leave without saying a word? Hence, he hurriedly reached out to grab him. "You haven't answered me." Gong Fan returned to his senses expressionlessly and asked disapprovingly, "Answer? What kind of answer do you want?" When Xianxia saw that his expression was still as cold as ice, he felt helpless. "What's wrong with you?" "I just regret it." "Regret?" "I shouldn't have come back in the first place, and I definitely shouldn't have let you wake up. That way, I could have occupied this body without any worries and wouldn't have to worry about competing with anyone." As he said this, Gong Fan angrily flung his hand away. He naturally thought that Xianxia would naturally be on the same side as Xianxia. He would probably choose to give up on him too. After all, compared to him, he would definitely prefer Yu. Xianxia was probably one of the people who had given up on him, just like Xianxia. As for him, he wasn't needed. What else was there to say to him? Gong Fan said resolutely, "What I regret the most is treating you as my family." After saying this, he ignored the petrified Gong Fan and left indifferently. Xianxia stood rooted to the ground for a long time, trembling in disbelief. He was angry that Gong Fan had let down his mommy's love. Mommy doted on him so much, but he had actually said such cruel words. Xianxia didn't know what Gong Fan had experienced. He didn't even know that Gong Fan had eavesdropped on the conversation between Xianxia and Wuxia yesterday. Hence, he only thought that Gong Fan had thoughts of betrayal. Was he planning to betray Yu and monopolize her body? Xianxia reacted and quickly chased after him. Before Gong Fan could go far, he rushed forward and grabbed his wrist. He shouted sternly, "You're not allowed to leave. Speak clearly." Gong Fan was also stunned. He had never seen such a furious Xianxia. He was like an enraged tyrannosaurus, glaring at him like a tiger eyeing its prey. "I won't allow you to betray Mommy and Yu." When Xianxia heard Xianxia's shout, she anxiously walked over with Yueyao in her arms. However, when she saw the two of them confronting each other, her eyes widened in shock. "What happened?" she asked, completely unaware of what had happened between the two of them. Xianxia turned around. When he saw that it was Xianxia, he snapped out of his rage and regained some rationality. "Mommy. What happened?" Xianxia asked in surprise. Why did the two of them quarrel? Xianxia would never quarrel with Yu, much less with Gong Fan. From what he knew, Yu and Gong Fan were both his younger brothers, and he was the older brother. Hence, he thought that he had to give in to his two younger brothers and never quarrel with them. It was extremely rare for her to see Xianxia so angry, and she had never seen him so angry with anyone. What happened? Chapter 42:53. Hence, when she saw Xianxia flaring up at Gong Fan, she became even angrier and was determined to get to the bottom of the matter. However, in Gong Fan's eyes, this was undoubtedly charity. Xianxia turned his face away awkwardly and refused to say anything. He didn't want Mommy to be disappointed in Gong Fan. If Mommy heard those words, she would definitely be very sad. Xianxia was considerate and thus didn't want to say anything. Xianxia looked at Gong Fan again, but he turned his face away expressionlessly and looked coldly at the ground. Even though he was looking at the cold ground, he didn't want to look at her. What's wrong? Xiao Fan? Xianxia was a little confused. Looking at the two children turning their heads angrily without looking at each other, she didn't know what to do. Why was he treating her so coldly for no reason? Could it be that the children were more sensitive and realized that she had already made a decision in her heart? Mommy, don't talk to him anymore. Xianxia snorted and said, I don't like him. I still like Yu the most. Yu is obedient, and gentle. He will never make Mommy sad. What's wrong with him? Nothing. Xianxia still refused to say. Xianxia was anxious. The more he refused to say, the more she felt that the matter was serious. Gong Fan didn't say anything and turned to leave. Xianxia called out to him and walked in front of him. She held his shoulders and said uneasily, "What's wrong with you? Why do I feel that you've been gloomy since early in the morning, as if you have a lot on your mind? What happened? Why don't you tell Mommy?" Gong Fan finally looked at her, but at that moment, his eyes were filled with disappointment. He didn't know why, but he felt an inexplicable surge of emotions. He clenched his fists and held back his sobs. Pretending to be calm, he asked, "If there comes a day when Mommy has to choose between you and me, I think Mommy must have made a choice." Xianxia was stunned when she heard that. She did not know why Gong Fan suddenly said that, but could it be that they had a telepathic reaction? Last night, because of her uneasiness and guilt, she couldn't get a good night's sleep. The next day, until Wuxia went to work, even though her eyes were closed, she wasn't in the mood to sleep. Uneasiness and guilt attacked her fiercely. She could even imagine how desperate this child who had wholeheartedly believed in her must have felt when she gave up on Gong Fan. When she thought of this, she felt as if her heart was being stabbed. However, even if she was reluctant, she had to make such a decision. However, for some unknown reason, why did Gong Fan also sense this matter? Xiaoxia's face was burning hot. At the side, Xianxia was also stunned. He did not understand the connection between the two events. However, thinking that Xianxia would not make such a cruel decision, he said stubbornly, "Are you kidding me? Don't you know what kind of person Mommy is? Even if there's only a 1 in a million chance, she will do her best to protect you. Whether it's you or you, Mommy will not give up easily." Chapter 42-54. For a moment, she could not hide the guilt she felt towards Gong Fan. Her eyes turned red. Gong Fan looked at her red eyes. His heart, which he thought was already made of stone, softened. He could not bear to force her or threaten her to change her decision. He had been given up, so he accepted being given up. In the past, he had sworn that no matter what decision Xianxia made, he would always trust her and protect her. Therefore, Gong Fan could not bear to blame her. Especially after seeing her tears, he could not harden his heart to face her. However, since it was her decision, he silently accepted it. Gong Fan knew and could tell that Xianxia must have been in a lot of pain when she made this decision. She was hesitating, and even now, she was still hesitating. He did not want to beg her to make a new decision because of this. After all, if this went on, he would feel tired and so would the others. Since it was so torturous, it was better to let go and give up. Everyone would be free and easy, and it would be much easier. Gong Fan knew that if that day really came, Xianxia would definitely be overwhelmed by guilt. He curled his lips and a layer of ice suddenly appeared in his eyes. Xianxia is right. Gong Fan looked at Xianxia coldly. "I am indeed cold and heartless. However, how can you say that I betrayed you? In this world, the weak are prey to the strong. Similarly, although we have different personalities, we both have the right to occupy this body." When Xianxia heard this, she did not expect him to say such cold and cruel words. The weak are prey to the strong? Between me and him, whoever has the ability has the right to occupy this body. If he doesn't have the ability, he deserves to be reduced to ashes. Am I wrong? As Gong Fan spoke, the expression on his face became even colder. "It's best that I disappear immediately. Otherwise, sooner or later, I will make you disappear. This body will truly belong to me." As he spoke, he turned around and was about to return to his room. Xianxia stood up in disbelief and stared at him in disbelief. "Who instructed you to say these words?" "Orders." Gong Fan did not even turn his head as he said indifferently, "No one instigated me. These are my words from the bottom of my heart. That's all." With that, he walked away, leaving Xianxia and Xianxia looking at each other. When Gong Fan returned to his room and saw Xianxia and Xianxia outside the door with a bang, Xianxia was still in a daze. She found it hard to believe that Gong Fan had said those words from the bottom of his heart. He wasn't sincere. What's going on? Why did he become like this? Xianxia shook her head. He's not Gong Fan. Gong Fan wouldn't do this to me. Mommy, calm down. Xianxia also felt that there was something suspicious about this. Why did Gong Fan suddenly become so cold and indifferent in just one night? He even said such overboard words? What happened? Xianxia couldn't help but feel suspicious. Could it be that this is another personality that he has? Otherwise, Why would Gong Fan say such heartless words? Gong Fan has always been like this. Have you forgotten how he was when he first came back? To us, to you, to Daddy, and to Yue Yao, he seemed to look at everyone with hatred, right? Chapter 42:55. That night, Gong Fan didn't come out to have dinner with everyone. Instead, he hid in his room alone. He had a very serious stomach problem. Xianxia had also reminded him about this. If he didn't eat on time, his stomach would hurt and it would be terrible. However, Gong Fan didn't want to come out. He locked himself in the dark room and curled up on the bed. He missed dinner time and his stomach was indeed in so much pain that it started to twitch. He clutched his stomach tightly, feeling cold all over. If he really decided to leave, since Xianxia had decided to give up on him, then he shouldn't be reluctant to leave. Be cold to the end. Let the coldness end everything. If he was cold to the end, the heartache would probably be less. Gong Fan turned over with difficulty and casually turned on the bedside lamp. He searched around the bedside table and as expected, he found a bottle of stomach pain medicine. Without the medicine, he chewed and swallowed the dregs. He returned to the bed and wrapped himself tightly with the blanket, shivering. Torture like self-abuse, giving up. At the door, Xianxia paced back and forth at the door with the food that had been reheated 3 times. She looked at it anxiously but couldn't muster the courage to knock on the door. Wuxia saw that she kept pacing in front of Gong Fan's door and didn't even bother to eat. He felt helpless and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He walked over and patted her shoulder gently. You haven't eaten yet. Eat first. However, Xianxia couldn't care less about eating. When she thought of Gong Fan's stomach problem, how could she care about herself? If he doesn't eat dinner, his stomach will definitely hurt. However, I've been standing at the door for a long time and haven't heard any movement. Could it be that his stomach is hurting and he's enduring it and unwilling to tell me? Xianxia rubbed her forehead in frustration and her eyes turned red again. Why is he like this? He was fine yesterday, but he suddenly changed today. I was caught off guard. As she said this, she tried to knock on the door again and said gently, Are you there? Gong Fan, come out and eat, okay? Mommy made your favorite century egg and lean meat porridge. If you don't have an appetite, eat a little to fill your stomach. After a while, there was still no response from the other side of the door. Xianxia bit her lip, her heart aching. Xianxia couldn't take it anymore. He pushed Xianxia aside and slammed the door with his fist. Gong Fan, come out and eat. Do you hear me? He couldn't bear to see Xianxia being wronged like this, especially when she had brought out her sincerity, yet he had abandoned her. He was not qualified. However, even though he knocked on the door loudly, there was no response from inside at all. Was he completely ignoring them? Xianxia was instantly enraged. Ignoring Xianxia's attempts to stop him, he lifted his leg and kicked the door open. His violence shocked Xianxia. She rushed in behind him and saw that Xianxia had just turned on the lights and saw a figure curled up under the blankets on the bed. Xianxia, who was originally in a rage, saw a bulging figure under the messy blankets. He walked over suspiciously and lifted the blankets. However, he saw Gong Fan hugging his arms and his body curled up like a shrimp. His forehead was covered in beads of cold sweat. Beads of sweat were dripping down from his temples. His pajamas were also drenched in cold sweat. Chapter 42:56. What's going on? Xianxia was shocked. Xianxia and Wuxia surrounded him anxiously. Amidst the panic, Wuxia was sharper. He saw the painkillers on the bedside table and immediately said, Could it be that his stomach is hurting again? His face is so pale. Could it be that he has low blood sugar? Xianxia said again, After all, he hasn't eaten for a day. Maybe his blood sugar is low. Xianxia couldn't care less. He bent down slightly, put his hands around the back of Gong Fan's neck and knees, and carried him up. Let's go to the hospital, Xianxia said and hurried out of the door. Even though he was also extremely frightened, he immediately made a decision in his moment of desperation. Wuxia and Xianxia looked at each other and immediately walked toward the garage. At the hospital, Gong Fan was hurriedly sent to the emergency room. The 3 of them waited nervously outside the door for a long time before the door of the emergency room finally opened. The doctor removed his mask and walked out with a serious expression. When Xianxia saw him, She immediately went up to him worriedly and blocked his way. "Doctor, how is he?" The doctor glanced at her and asked, "Are you the child's family?" Before Xianxia could answer, he glanced at Xiao Yichen behind Xianxia. Seeing that he looked exactly like Gong Fan, he understood. "Fortunately, you sent him here in time. The child is suffering from acute morphine poisoning. It's probably caused by accidentally taking too many painkillers. We've already pumped his stomach to induce vomiting. If he was sent here any later, I'm afraid that the child would suffer from respiratory failure due to the morphine poisoning. The consequences would be unimaginable." Morphine poisoning. When Xianxia heard this, she couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. If Xiao Yichen hadn't barged in, perhaps Gong Fan would have suffered from respiratory failure due to the morphine poisoning. And all of this, they didn't know about it. Xianxia lamented over Xiao Yichen's violent barging. If it hadn't been for him, perhaps Gong Fan would have been in deep trouble. Why did this child take so many painkillers? The doctor wondered if Gong Fan had suicidal tendencies. Xianxia knew what he was suspecting and answered, "He probably took painkillers because he has a serious stomach problem. In the past, when he took medicine, I was the one who was supervising him. The dosage on was strict. This time we weren't by his side. He threw a tantrum and refused to eat his stomach, so he took the medicine. And his stomach on the pain. Like this." The doctor's tone on was. "You're a parent on, is too. This kind of dangerous medicine should be kept by the parents themselves. How can it be placed in a place where children can easily touch it?" Xianxia pursed her lips and lowered her head. She accepted the doctor's criticism guiltily. In fact, the doctor thought that Gong Fan was as childish as an ordinary child. Actually, only Xianxia knew that Gong Fan knew that he could not take too much medicine. The big problem was that it was too painful this time. He had given up on himself and swallowed a lot at once. However, he did not know the consequences and almost caused such a disaster. "You're too irresponsible as a parent. You put the medicine where the child can see it. If he didn't know, he would have taken it all at once. Now that you've sent him back, I'm afraid there's nothing you can do to save him." Chapter 42:57. Wuxia looked a little unhappy. When he saw Xianxia lowering her head and apologizing sincerely, he couldn't help but feel sorry for her and pulled her into his arms. "We'll be careful next time. How's the child?" He quickly changed the topic. The doctor stopped there and heaved a sigh of relief. "He's been saved, but he has to be hospitalized for a few days. This child doesn't seem to have a good constitution and needs to be taken care of carefully. He'll be transferred to the ward soon. You guys can watch over him in the ward." Okay. Soon, Gong Fan was pushed out of the emergency room and transferred to the intensive care unit. Xianxia came to the ward and saw Gong Fan lying on the bed with a pale face. There was no trace of blood on his face. His eyes were tightly shut and his hands were slightly curled. He was motionless and lifeless. Just by looking at it, she felt as if a knife was being twisted in her heart. How did he become like this? Xianxia casually pulled a stool by the bed and sat down. Her heart ached as she held Gong Fan's cold hand. In his coma, Gong Fan seemed to realize this warm touch and couldn't help but hold her hand, unwilling to let go of this warmth. Xianxia's heart ached even more. How did he become like this? What exactly happened to Gong Fan's body? Wuxia and Xiao Yichen stood at the door, not daring to disturb her. Now, Gong Fan was on an 4-drip and Xianxia was guarding him without moving. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he said to Wuxia, "Tonight, I'll stay here and watch over brother. Daddy, do you want to go home first? You have to wake up early tomorrow morning." "How can I go to work in peace in this situation?" Wuxia laughed helplessly. Even though he usually looked deep and didn't seem to care much about Gong Fan, he was still his son after all. It was just that compared to a mother's love, a father's love had always been as deep as a mountain. He said, "I've applied for leave tomorrow. Today, I'll stay in the ward to accompany you. Why don't I send you back and rest early?" Xiao Yichen frowned and said honestly, "I can't sleep peacefully with little brother like this." "Then stay here and accompany them." Wuxia patted his head. "Go and get some hot water." "Oh, got it." Xiao Yichen briskly picked up 2 bottles of hot water and walked to the boiling room. Wuxia walked over to Xiaxia's side, gently held her shoulders and squeezed them. Unforgettable looked up at him. Don't worry. Since the doctor said that he'll be fine, there's nothing to worry about. I keep having the feeling that he has something on his mind, but he doesn't tell me. After Wuxia heard this, he suddenly lowered his voice and asked, could it be that he accidentally heard the conversation outside yesterday? Unforgettable turned pale with fright. How is that possible? Other than that, I can't think of any other possibilities. Perhaps he couldn't sleep in the middle of the night and accidentally overheard our conversation in the back garden. Who knows? Could it be? Unforgettable couldn't help but shudder at the thought of it. If Gong Fan heard this, then he would definitely be bitterly disappointed. If he were in Gong Fan's shoes and heard that he had been abandoned, he would feel especially upset. If that was really the case, she wouldn't be surprised by Gong Fan's abnormal behavior today.